Jumping in on part 2 here of our High Elf lore compilation. As just a reminder, this is the lore from the Warhammer Fantasy 8th edition and around 6th, 7th, and 8th edition, of course, in general. This does not really have any updated information from Warhammer the Old World, so just a bit of transparency up front. This is just a means of me re-releasing a lot of the lore that I've created over the years, so I can take a little break from YouTube. Just as a heads up, though, when it comes to the old world, not much has changed lore-wise. Usually minor dates, minor characters, or things that have kind of said, oh, this happened in this sequential order versus a previous sequential order. It's nothing too drastic where you'd be like, well, that's now been retconned or what have you. So just a bit of transparency here. Now, this is part 2 of the High Elves. I'll be doing the vampire counts, the Empire, as well as my Warhammer 40k Imperial Guard Regiment coming out here pretty soon as well. So you can find all those linked at the end of this video, in the description, what have you, to the entire lore compilation playlist. But let's get started here on part 2 of the High Elf lore compilation. Total War Warhammer 2's campaign is centered around the Great Vortex, a swirling hurricane of magic in the heart of Ulthuan. It's created by Kalidor Dragon Tamer, and it serves as a means of drawing and drastically reducing the winds of magic in the Warhammer world. But what is it really, though, right? Why did this even happen? What events come about that would cause this massive vortex of magic? So today we're going to talk about the Great Catastrophe, and that is something that Creative Assembly has talked about, and we know from the intro of every single race in Total War Warhammer 2 as the reason for the Great Vortex. This is a series of events that leads to the downfall of the old ones and the rise of the elves and the dwarfs, and really the successful preservation of the world we currently play in. So that's going to be this video here today. So let's kind of set the scene for everything, kind of where it all kind of began. So we know that the old ones were the starfaring race that created the lizardmen, and these are the same old ones that we see in the 40k universe, these kind of omnipotent lizards, lizard people, I guess, that get involved in this huge war, the War of the Heavens, and it's between the old ones and the Catan, who actually ally with the Necrons. And so the old ones then create the Eldar race, they create the Quarks, or Croc, or whatever, the basically proto-orcs. And in Warhammer, they create, as we've said, the lizardmen in their image, and they're the first, and they start the first spawning of the Slann. And these Slann, as we know, they assist them in creating the geomantic web, separating the continents, because there was one kind of giant Warhammer Pangea at one point, the Saurus, the Skink, and Crocosaur species as well. So from there, the old ones create the elves, who they taught magic to in the same way as they taught the Slann, and then shortly after that they create the dwarfs. And the dwarfs were created kind of contrary to the elves. The whole point of the dwarfs was to be, okay, if the elves are too emotional, that's kind of a thing, and too magic prone, the dwarfs are the kind of not the antithesis, but they're more honor bound. They're not as likely to get flagrant with their emotions and start sliding with a Slaanesh or something like that. So the dwarfs are created who, rather than being able to control magic, can imbue magic rather than, of course, wielding it. So they take part in runesmithing. So lastly, though, they create man, and man kind of acts as a middle ground between the three. Not as corruptible as the elves, quote unquote, but not as magic illiterate as the dwarfs. And when I say illiterate, I just mean the capability to wield magic in the conventional way. And towards the end, though, in haste, the old ones create the halflings and the ogres. And it's funny because the ogres were, and I've said this before, were supposed to be the ultimate answer to chaos. But they couldn't really finish what they were doing, hence why ogres are all typically some variation of inept. And it's worth noting that the old ones did create the orcs, as we've said, but not in this world. It's kind of assumed that they came from the Quarks that they created on other planets. They're basically massive fungi that spawn, but initially that's neither here nor there. So let's kind of get into the initial phases of what creates the Great Catastrophe. And the first big act of the Great Catastrophe is the catastrophe itself, and that's the old ones' polar gates. And these are the polar gates that they use to basically travel. They use this to dip in and out of the warp, but these polar gates collapse, and this results in a massive implosion that opens chaos gates at both the north and south poles. And this brings about a whole mess of bad news. warpstone meteors, worldwide mutations as a result of the warpstone dust from the warpstone meteors, the coming of Morslieb, which is the moon, a giant hunk of warpstone, and that's what really acts as the moon for the Warhammer world. That's just really to name a few. But obviously one of the most important things to happen is the unending flow of chaos who come hurtling out of the gates, and they set to really kind of devour all the souls on this plane. They go to completely destroy it, as that's kind of what demons of chaos do. But this is when we get beastmen. They're mutated by the warpstone for each creature that it taints. So Ratman, they come about as well, or Skaven as we now know, but they're born from the swamplands north of Tilia, soon to be Skaven Blight. But we also get hippogriffs, chimeras, manticores, and griffins as a result of this rampant mutation from the warpstone dust. So I guess not everything's bad. I mean, Eltharion wouldn't have his faithful griffin mouth if it wasn't for this. But the old ones sort of disappear, right? They vanish at this time. They leave the kind of races of the world to fend for themselves. They just kind of disappear. Nothing really... It's kind of assumed that they left the Warhammer world to go fight the War of the Heavens, and they just couldn't focus on it anymore. So they just kind of left it to its own devices with the intention of coming back. So this is where the Slann kind of rose to the occasion and sealed much of the giant gateways to the Immaterium. And in doing so, this kind of killed off over half of the Slann, and it melts their brains. It talks about how it just kind of makes them go insane from the huge influx of magical energy. And this is really a realm that they don't really know much about. Like their old one masters, they know tons about it. As a quick aside, actually, on that, at this time there were far more winds of magic in the world, period, and the magnitude and strength of spells was 10 times what it is now. So I mean, even as a further aside to that, the old ones used the Immaterium to travel, seamlessly at first, but eventually when the sentient races are created, their emotions cause fluctuations in the warp and cause the kind of nascent warp entities to come about. That's what creates the Chaos Gods, are the emotions of sentient beings such like humans and such. And it talks about in the 40k lore how the old ones used to kind of push through the warp in almost as a gentle rolling current, and then after that it kind of got a little more tumultuous, and they're the ones that create the webway. I mean, the old ones are vastly important to both worlds' history, a little bit less in the Warhammer world because they kind of touch on it and then leave, but in the 40k history the Eldar flourish because of the webway that the old ones created, they used to move, and then the webway becomes this whole point of contention between Space Marines and Eldar. But huge digression there. But the problem was that the Slann didn't close the gateways entirely, but they did help to stem the kind of tide of demons coming in. And the issue is that you have a near limitless and cunning foe against these kind of fledgling races. Lizardmen have just sprouted out in the past 1,000 years, and then elves and dwarves and men shortly after that. They're not very developed, and the lizardmen were primarily guided by the old ones. They weren't used to kind of calling the shots themselves. So as chaos kind of scours the world, they brought many primitive tribes of men into their fold, and this is where you get the beginning of the Warriors of Chaos as a whole, imbuing them with their kind of fell powers. And you're going to hear from this video where a lot of the races come to be. We've already talked about how Beastmen and Skaven have come out of this, how High Elves, Dwarfs, or Elves in general, I guess, and men have come about, how Lizardmen have come about. We now know how Warriors of Chaos, and we will continue to hear more and more. We know about the Ogres too as well. But this is what starts really the first Chaos War, the first Chaos incursion. And what happens now starts that kind of war with these next couple events. So with the Warriors of Chaos marching with their cloven and bestial demons of chaos, the Pantheon kind of took to the terrestrial plane as they burned their way through the world. And the Lizardmen faced the brunt of the Chaos incursion, them being the most developed race at the time, and the oldest and largest of the races. So the Saurus were easily kind of able to go toe-to-toe with the demons. They're these big, hulking lizard, raptor, hybrid dinosaur creatures, but they're able to match the kind of ferocity of these demons. And the Slann were able to harness all these rampant winds of magic cascading around the world to deliver these massive amounts of destruction upon our hooved friends. But the winds of magic, are fickle. That's important to note because as we kind of go forward here. But like I was saying, there's so much winds of magic being outpoured from these gates that the Slann can command an amazing amount of destruction with this. And despite all this, though, the demons were, you know, to use a cliche, legion, and really had no end in sight. So with each victory came another defeat that was more and more crippling than the last. And the Slann eventually started losing control of the extreme winds of magic. As we said, they're very fickle. And this causes these epic kind of miscasts that result in these mental backlashes, the blowing their little froggy brains apart. I'm sure that's the noise it would make. The winds of magic, though, are really a part of the immaterium. You know, they're not a subject of the Warhammer world, like, oh, I'm sitting on a plane and I feel the wind of the wind, and I feel the wind of the magic. No, it's directly coming from the warp. And the demons obviously have a mastery of it that the Slann just can't match. So Slann were pulling out all the stops here. They, you know, began changing the landscape itself to serve the lizardmen and really impede the demons. And they retreat back to their temple cities, and all of Lustria was overridden by a deadly, vicious jungle with carnivorous plants and wildlife. If from the tabletop version of the game, lizardmen have access to jungle swarms, which we don't get in this, and a lot more actual, like we get the basilisks in the lizardman roster, a lot more actual beasts and more dinosaurs in the lizardman roster, and you kind of see that coming out here. Like they directly create and control this vicious jungle, more or less, and this slows down the demons' pretty much endless march considerably. You know, this jungle is basically a living trap for them, and the lizardmen employ ancient engines and devices left over by the old ones, and that kind of makes it sound like, because in the book literally says that it kills by the thousands, so it makes me think that maybe like some sort of plasma technology was left behind, or something like a las, like not quite literally a las cannon, because that's kind of from the Imperium, but still something like that, some sort of destructive device that allows them to kill demons in huge swaths. So the Slann even went one step further than all this and set up a series of wards that were powered by the geometric web, you know, connected from each temple city. So this allows them to really hold back the tide, because each demon has to crash against these wards before they can even get in, and the wards for the most part will kill them. So eventually, you know, demons being demons, were able to breach the wards of Zahutek and destroying the temple city, which led to the weakening of the wards at Hwaddle, Laxlaw, and Zodl, who all really fell shortly after, you know, them being all connected by this geometric web, by this series of wards. So more cities fell after that, you know, Chaqua, Wazodek, Zarmuda, each one with newer and more cunning ways that the demons had devised. You know, only a handful of cities were left, and these ones were defended by the most ancient and strongest of the Slann. And it's important to note that when I say more cunning ways, you know, you've got plagues infesting these cities, you've got Nurglings, or I'm sorry, like Tzeentch using all sorts of manner of change to affect these cities, like all sorts of the crazy ways that chaos likes to do their due. But from here, this kind of stems things sort of kind of have separate offshoots, falling into the three major races, you know, the lizardmen, the elves, and dwarves. So we'll go into what happens with each, but first let's just kind of finish the story of the lizardmen, then we'll jump into the dwarves, and we'll conclude it with the elves, because the elves kind of just save the day. God, they're so cool. Who wouldn't want to be an elf? But the demons eventually make it to Itza, and we know Itza from Total Warhammer 2, and this is called the first city, and really the center of the geometric web under the lizardmen. And this is where we find Lord Kroak. And Lord Kroak, from the tabletop, if you know, he's the very first and strongest of the Slann of them all. You know, remember, there were multiple spawnings of Slann, and each one was weaker than the last. I think there's a total of 4. And the demons were literally vaporized by the ward that Kroak put up, because that's how strong he was. But we're talking about centuries of conflict here. This isn't just something that happens over 10, 15, 20 years. These are hundreds of years of fighting. The Great Catastrophe is, again, centuries long. It's not just a simple undertaking here. So as time kind of passes, the demons hurl themselves at the bubble, more or less, time and time again, against to weaken. And rather than let the shield fall, though, Kroak explodes it outward, right? And he tries to take as many demons with him, and it talks about how it kills hundreds of thousands of demons. And a final conflict sort of ensues as the Temple Guard of Lord Kroak hold off a near limitless horde of demons on it's really just an anticlimactic name, but the Bridge of the Stars. And this gives Croak enough time to work his final spell, as it were, his final flash, like Vegeta in Dragon Ball Z. But the Temple Guard were slaughtered to a lizard, not a man, but they were successful as Croak unleashes this torrent of magical energy, destroying demons as he turned the tide single-handedly. But Khorne, the ever-bitter ninny, sent a dozen bloodthirsters. These are the greater demons of Khorne, protected personally by the god of battle after Croak himself. So they reached the top of the pyramid and completely tore Croak limb from limb. And in doing so, they actually freed his spirit to unleash even more magic. It talks about how Croak was so dedicated to the task and such conviction he wanted to destroy these demons. He's no longer bound by his mortal body now. So he fills the first city with this sort of divine light that, think of it as like banishment times 50 overcast, that banishes each and every demon present. And before we jump over to the dwarfs, it's important to know that these skinks, literally in the days after the Great Catastrophe, they go around Lustria trying to find the pieces of Lord Croak, and they assemble him back together, and he becomes this mummified Slann on top of a Palantir with his spirit kind of hovering over it and around it. Like he's still there. His spirit is so strong that he can reanimate his body. In the end times, he literally wills himself back to life because his spirit is so strong. He's so connected to the Winds of Magic and the Warhammer world. So that's kind of a really cool bit about Lord Croak. He's a very strong caster in the game. He's a really, really cool character from a lore perspective because he's kind of like the ultimate Deus Ex Machina for the Lizardmen. In fact, in the end times, he does quite a lot of crazy stuff. And we'll go into that in some end times videos that I hope to make. But we'll delve into our moving bar stools. I mean dwarfs, and their part in the Great Catastrophe. The dwarfs were completely isolated at this time. Living in the World's Edge Mountains, they really only had interaction with the tribal races of man at this time, and no one else. This is also a time when all the ancestor gods of the dwarfs are still alive. This is considered the age of ancestors. So when the demons came, they did not find the dwarfs lacking in their defense. Grungi had taught his folk runesmithing, Valaya warded against the fell magic of the demons, and Grimnir led the valiant armies of the Dawi. Grimnir is the kind of warrior patron of the Dawi, and they destroys these demon hosts, one after the other, and eventually starts to mount counterattacks throughout the mountains. And actually, they had fought so viciously in the initial portions of the incursion that they had completely cleared the World's Edge Mountains of demons. And Grimnir then went on the offensive, him being the future patron of Slayers. But eventually, Kalador Dragon Tamer, we've talked about a little bit, and his High Elf fleet were blown off course after getting this massive naval battle with the Chaos Fleet on the open ocean. And they land on the Old World and met Grimnir. And this is a huge point in the history here, as this is the first time Elf and Dwarf are aware that either one even exists. And they're not foes yet, so that's even bigger. So a large force of beastmen attacks, right as these two races meet each other, and they actually ally together to crush the beastmen. And since Kalador had come to the Old World looking for evidence of a Chaos Gate, and corroborating Grimnir's story with what Anarion was telling him, he devised that there had to be a Chaos Gate in the northern Chaos Wastes, above where we would have the Empire. And the two sort of part ways in an amiable way. They give one another a gift, kind of setting up the eventual alliance of elf and dwarf. So we see the elves and the dwarves meeting each other and having it be a very positive interaction, and having them come out of it not enemies. So it's important to see here. This is where that alliance kind of starts between Kalador and Grimnir, and eventually the elves and the dwarfs. But after Kalador departed, the demons returned to the World's Edge Mountains. But this time, they were prepared, not only in numbers but wild to the ways of the Dawe. They besieged all of their holds, and even though Grimnir could lead successful offensive, he could not lead them all. And one after one, holds start to fall to the demons, and this spurred Grimnir's march north towards the Chaos Gates, which we've covered in our video on Grimnir itself. I don't want to repeat that whole portion of it because it's pretty epic. So I'll link that to the end of this video. Go ahead and click on that when this video ends, and you can hear the story of how Grimnir marches north with his son. But after the Great Vortex was erected, the besieging demons all vanished for the most part, along with the dwarf ancestor gods. And that's the kind of weird thing, is a lot of stuff in the Warhammer world, especially with their patron gods or their patron kings like Gilles le Breton, become sort of this anachronism for King Arthur, right? Where when his people need him the most, he will return. And that's what happens with the dwarf ancestor gods. They're thought to have, well, for the exception of Grimnir, they're thought to have rejoined into the heart of the mountain to come out when their race needs them. Dwarfs, the Dawi, the Karazhan needs them the most. Speaking of the Karazhan, this really began the rise of the Karazhan and the height of the dwarven society as they rekindled their holds in the World's Edge Mountain. As for the Mountains of Morn, though, and they had extended at that point at this time, these never rejoined their dwarf empire, and this is where the Chaos Dwarfs reside, corrupted by Hashut, the evil bull god and father of darkness. And we'll go into a little bit about the Chaos Dwarfs soon here, but the Chaos Dwarfs have sorcerers, and the sorcerers are really their priest caste that rule over all of the Chaos Dwarfs. So there's no like Thane and Lord system like there is in the normal Karazhan course. That's kind of a cool thing to know. But we'll go into really just the best race ever to have ever existed. So I've saved the best for last, obviously, as this is really the button on the story as a whole, and not just my simple personal bias with the elves, but also it's about the high elves, you know. So they're the most valiant, bravest, and strongest of all the races, before, currently, and yet to come, for the exception of their lack of AP missiles. But hey, they die with grace. So we've sort of loosely touched on what happens here, right? But I want to go over everything one more time, as it really bears repeating. It's very important because this sets up, again, what we know the world to be. So it all starts with Anarion, who was actually just a wanderer at the start of the Chaos Incursion. Going from place to place, he effectively traveled the entire world. So he returns to Ulthuan when the fighting really starts to get particularly fierce. His homeland is besieged by unholy and fell monstrosities, all over the place. The entire nation was beset by chaos, and and I don't mean like, oh, they're at the gates. No, all of Ulthuan was attacked, inner and outer kingdoms. So he has to battle his way directly to the shrine of Assyrian. And here he sort of offers himself up as a sacrifice to save his people from chaos. So he did what any sensible person asking for a request would be. Chucked himself into the flames of Assyrian. And rather than dying, he was born anew as the first Phoenix King, an incarnate of Assyrian. And this becomes a trend that all the Phoenix Kings have to follow. But just like Tyrion in the years to come, Assyrian wins his first battle at the Shrine of Assyrian itself, heaving this hunting spear and slaying the demon prince that leads this charge of this massive demon horde outside the shrine. He then picked up the demon's own weapons and slaughtered the host completely. That's something out of like a dwarf slayer Book of Grudges right there. And it's important to note that the elves were at a pretty bleak state at this time. They weren't winning any battles and were constantly being thrown back on their own homeland. And this victory invigorated the elven people, and they immediately rallied to Anarion's banner. And up to this point, the elves weren't versed in battle or warfare at all, really. They had been farmers and simple people of the land. So this was all very new to them. And sealing the deal, Calador Dragon Tamer also swore fealty to Anarion. So the two, like Tyrion and Teclis, trained the mighty glittering hosts of the elves, Anarion by sword, Calador by spell. And Anarion commissioned the priests of Vol to smith weapons. And we've talked about how Vol is all about smithing and the god of the forge, almost like a Hephaestus of the Greek pantheon. And he's also creating these armor from Ithelmar and steel as Calador starts to train the next generation of mages to help banish the demons. So finally the elves could mount an actual offensive against chaos, and most importantly, win. For 100 years the wars rage all throughout Ulthuan, and even as they fought and won, they still started losing the long war of attrition, and elves began to really lose heart here, elves being quite emotional. Calador kind of saw the writing on the wall for this, right? And as it were, he devised a plan to work on a giant vortex that would drain the magic from the world, and thus the demon's very means of materializing in this world. Anarion resisted the plan, and even though he knew that this was the only way out, and it kind of harkens back to the intro of the High Elf campaign, with Tyrion and Teclis kind of arguing back and forth with one another. But they would have chosen Anarion's path of constant warfare had the demons not attacked Aberlorn. There, they killed Astariel, the Everqueen of Ulthuan and Anarion's wife. And although not dead, Anarion assumed his children had been killed as well, and this sent him into a black rage, like just completely consumed him in anger. And he flew on the back of his mighty dragon, in Draugr, who we've talked about, to pull the Widowmaker from the Blighted Isle at the Altar of Cain. We see this in Total War Warhammer 2, and actually having an Altar of Cain as a unique building choice as well. But this weapon could kill gods and men alike, and it was a curse blade, one that existed before the time of elves even. And it was said it would doom your entire lineage, and that was something that actually happens later on. The heirs of Anarion, the heirs of Anarion's line, are cursed with the curse of Anarion. They're tested for it. So it's something that actually comes to fruition. But there's this sweeping sort of historic moment or histrionic moment is probably a better word for it, where it talks about Anarion flying to the island and the elven gods whispering into his ears as he travels to tell him to turn back, turn back. And Anarion's fury is just too wild and too hot to be tamed. So he draws this sword and gets imbued with the power of Cain, the god of blood, the god of warfare, basically the elf version of Khorne. But the veterans of the war so far, the more grim and darker of the elves, flocked to Anarion's banner even more so, as he created this kind of new kingdom in the land of Nagaraith. And this is the seat of the court of Anarion that we talked about. And this is where he took up Marathi as his second wife, who is this seeress, and they end up having Malekith, his son. So Anarion starts to become cold and cruel. The sword and his rage are slowly kind of hardening the once very noble elf, and this led to Calidor leaving his court, saying like, no, I'm not taking this. And he takes all of his dragons, which sounds very petty, very elvish, but he takes all of his dragons and settles in what is to eventually become Calidor. And Anarion just is incensed. He's furious, and before he could really lash out at Calidor for leaving, another massive demon invasion begins. An invasion so massive that it spelled pretty much utter doom for the entire elven race. Like they saw that and went, no, a foregone conclusion, we get it. But Calidor, sort of rather than consulting with Anarion, made for the Isle of the Dead to start his ritual to create the Great Vortex. He's kind of forcing Anarion's hand. So Anarion rides out to aid who is his closest friend. I mean, even though he's angry at this point, it's still like they have built the Elven Empire to what it is at this point, and he knows in the long run that Calidor is ultimately right. So here you have this epic meeting of these two massive elven hosts, and it even describes in the book that the dragons can actually like blot out the sun. There's so many of them, and when you read the Blood of Anarion book in the Whalem King, Tyrion and Teclis trilogy, the very beginning, the prologue of it talks about how there's these dragons darting in and out of the conflict and just ripping things apart. But there's all manner of beasts against this unending legion of demons. And as Calidor's mages create the vortex on the Isle of the Dead, elves and demons kind of just savage each other as dragons sweep from the sky, like I was saying, just ripping each other apart. But you have this titanic finale of the conflict as Anarion and Draugr single-handedly kill 4 demons of chaos as they try to breach Calidor's wards that were set up to protect the mages during the invocation. So this is huge, as a mortal man really cannot kill one, let alone 4 greater demons. I mean, even if I'm thinking about it from a tabletop perspective, a greater demon of Khorne's stat profile is insane when it comes to, an Electa count. Like, no thank you, it's not going to happen. Or even just an elf prince, because an elf prince has got such a terrible actual tanking capabilities that it just get beat around by the greater demon of Khorne. But the battle really took its toll, really. It gravely wounded both Draugr and Anarion. And in that Blood of Anarion book, it talks about how a greater demon of Khorne slashes his axe into Draugr, explodes the side of its body, sending pieces of dragon shrapnel, more or less, all over Anarion's helmet. And It's a sad part of the book. I'm not gonna lie. I read it and cried my ass off, but they killed the dragon. But as the vortex was completed, the world fell silent before these bolts of energy, and we saw this right in the video here. Bolts of energy coalesced and streamed up into the sky, drawing in the winds of magic in a swirling, kind of constant moving hurricane of arcane fury. And the Slann lent their aid from across the world, sensing the creation of the massive vortex to help strengthen and empower it. And this is a direct excerpt from the High Elf Army book, and I really like the way it was worded, so I'm going to read that verbatim for you. So, his foes defeated, but his body ruined, Anarion climbed wearily upon the back of the wounded Draugr and made once more for the Blighted Isle. Barely managing to complete the journey, and Draugr crashed to the ground on the shores of that dismal island, trembling from fatigue and the terrible wounds to his ancient body, and Draugr gave one last bellow of defiance and died. Alone, Anarion crawled back to the altar of Cain. He knew that should anyone take the weapon of Cain, it would rule the world, and so he thrust it back into the rock from whence it came. Then, it is said, he lay down beside the ravaged and torn bulk of his beloved steed, and passed from that age of the world. Very Lord of the Rings-esque ending to the greatest High Elf to ever have lived. And the result of the vortex are this series of earthquakes that really reshaped the continent of Ulthuan, but at least the polar gates were sealed, and these demonic legions are held at bay. So you have here now the creation of this vortex, and this vortex becomes a centerpiece for the Total Warhammer 2 campaign, and it allows for the Dwarf Empire, the Karazhan Corps, to rise strong and true. The High Elves now start to, after this point, they can now start rebuilding, and the Sundering is not far off from this point, but this allows them to expand to every portion of the New World and the Old World. This is when you get your Citadel of Dusk and Dawn being made, where the Sea Elves kind of make their home in what eventually becomes Marienburg and the such. So you get the High Elves kind of expanding out and creating the High Elf Empire, or the Elf Empire, and the Lizardmen start to piece together everything at this point, trying to find some way to get hints to what the master plan is, the Great Plan from the Old Ones, as it's called. And they kind of always act as the behind the shadows, lawful good type people. Like, they're always doing whatever it takes to get the world moving in the direction that they think the Old Ones are moving in. But this video here, again, I just wanted to kind of illustrate the importance of the Great Catastrophe, the importance of the Great Vortex, and what each of the races play in it. You know, we don't really get a conclusive, I guess you could say conclusive readout or a conclusive idea of what happens during this time from the game. So I wanted to give you guys an ability to really understand that. So hopefully you got a pretty good idea from that here. If you have any questions about the Great Catastrophe, or you want to know more about some of the other races like the Wood Elves, which are still part of the Elves of this time, they don't really get any play in this because they're not there. The humans are pretty much kind of tribal, so they don't really matter at this point yet. There's no Sigmar. There's some Bretonni, which are the proto-Bretonia tribesmen. You've got Araby, who basically talks about they mention Araby and Khemri mention the Grand Chaos incursion, and they mention that these like grand spirits of the desert rose up to defeat things. So they never really played a direct hand in things. They talk about their almost like a creation story, more or less, about these desert spirits defending and destroying these demons for them. So it's very interesting little blurb from them. But if you do have any other question, guys, please feel free to comment. More than happy to answer here. Got some more goodies coming your way. Some more stuff on, I'm going to be doing a video on Valaya, as I've promised, and some more of the Tomb King's lore, but hopefully some other lore here I've got planned as well. So stay tuned. Don't forget to subscribe, and let me know if you want to hear about or know anything else. Have a good one, guys, and take care. So after yesterday's big excitement with the launch of the High Elves, the Dark Elves, and the Lizard Men, I know I'm still kind of fully torqued from it. I wanted to kind of go into the history and the lore of the High Elves, and I'm going to be only touching the beginning history of the elves as a whole, really. I'll touch in on what makes the Dark Elves and how their whole treachery begins and whatnot when I go into the history of them. But this video will pretty much primarily cover the early history of more or less the United Elf Nation, I guess you could call it. But it really starts out in Ulthuan. So you've got the old world. We've gone over this map here before, and you've got the old world on the right, the new world on the left, and smack dab in the middle of that, you've got Ulthuan, which is basically this giant mist-shrouded island is what it's referred to in the book. It's this big circular thing with another little sea in the center that's called the Inner Sea, actually. It's, as you can see from this picture here now. And in the center of that is the Isle of the Dead, and we'll get to what that is. In the very north, you'll see the Blighted Isle and the Shrine of Cain. But you've got all these different high elf nations, more or less. You've got Nagaraith, Trace, Kothic, Averlorn, and the cool thing about Averlorn is it kind of plays into how the high elves and the wood elves have like an affinity with nature. The Everqueen comes from Averlorn, and the Everqueen is like way too similar, and in fact it's like spot on, like the wood elves. And next to Averlorn you've got Illyrian, and then you've got Tiranoc and Calidor and Etain and Safri and Everse, Everse or whatever. I'm not really sure how to pronounce that one, but every single one of these nations has got its own kind of special thing about it. Like Safri is pretty much where the White Tower of Hoeth is there, and that's where like all the best mages are. You've got Calidor, which is where all the dragons are from. Tiranoc is this really cool land with basically all the chariots and all the charioteers all come from Tiranoc. You've got Illyrian, which is all these rich open plains where the horses come from. You have these Illyrian Reavers are our unit in the game that are these really fast attack what's it called? They're just like the wood elves. Fast attack horsemen that shoot bows and arrows. Trace or whatever it is where the white lions are from. So pretty much everyone has got some sort of investment in the high elf army, and when we eventually see this in the game, you'll see like the Dragon Princes of Calidor are the elite cavalry units of the high elves. Everyone comes from one of these locations, and it's really cool to see how they're going to really play this out. I'm really curious because the Warhammer Total War world itself has such a rich, diverse unit group per faction that I think it's going to play out really well here. But that getting a little off track, getting a little segue, right my segue into the segue. We'll get back onto target here. So everything really kind of starts with one certain elf. There's elfdom in general right now is for the most part pretty peaceful. They don't really have a ton of warriors. They don't have a bunch of sorcerers and mages and wizards yet or anything like that. In fact, all of their sorcery is used for civilian stuff for the most part. It's not really used in the scope of war. So elves at this time, again, very peaceful. The Chaos Gates haven't collapsed. Elves don't really... It kind of depends on which book you're reading, but the elves don't know too much about the lizardmen. The lizardmen know about the elves because they're kind of a little more close to the old ones, quote-unquote, plan. And so they know that they exist, but they don't really interfere. They're more, again, concerned with how that plan is proceeding. And that'll kind of play into how the lizardmen are not really good or evil. They're just kind of like, hey, how do we keep order in the world? But we'll get to that later. But so the elves, again, peaceful, don't really have much to do with anyone in a negative way. But when the Chaos Gates open and the polar when they collapse, when the Chaos Gates collapse in the poles and all the Chaos Demons rush into the old world, pretty much Ulthuan is entrenched in warfare at this point. Demons are coming from everywhere. They're killing everything. And you've got this one wanderer, Anarian. And Anarian is pretty much he's the first Phoenix King of the High Elves. He's the best warrior. He's basically the High Elves version of Sigmar. Kind of every single race in Warhammer has more or less either one or a small troop, like say like the dwarves have 3, but some sort of god warrior who is the savior of their race, and in dark times will come back to their race. Like Sigmar's got that. Gilles Le Breton has got that, and eventually you find out in end times that he's been the Green Knight this whole time and protecting Bretonnia. Anarian, his blood passes to Tyrion and Teclis, and they come to help out in the end times. And there's a big dynamic between those two because Tyrion is seen as the incarnation of Anarian, and Teclis is seen as the incarnation of Calidor, but we'll get to him too in a little bit. So this kind of just follows that same theme here. We've got one really super badass warrior, king, god, idol of the High Elf nation. He comes back to Ulthuan because he's traveling all over the world. He's learning all this, all the other like base civilizations. It's not like there's many men out or something like that. There's no empire. There's no Bretonnia. Things are tribal at this point. There's not a whole lot of anything. In fact, I don't even think the men are at this point in the history of anything. I think it's just dwarves, high elves, and lizardmen. And remember, high elves are wood elves and dark elves. They haven't made that split yet. So all of elfdom again is under the high elf everything. But he comes back and he defends the shrine of Assyrian, and Assyrian is the patron god of the high elves. There's a bunch of gods that they worship, but Assyrian is pretty much the patron one. The high elves themselves call themselves the Asur, just like the dark elves call themselves the Druchi. And the high elf in general just has a very, as I've said before, a very, very strong place in my heart because it's the army that I collected. It's one of the very first ones I ever collected, and I just love the way that the whole history is. It's very rich and it's very tragic. So you've got this Anarian who is defending the shrine of Assyrian, and the demons are beset on all sides. They're going to knock down the shrine, and that's a big figurehead. It's just like I'm trying to compare how it would be in American standards. But it's like basically like the White House is representative of the democracy of the United States. The Shrine of Assyrian is representative of the strength of the High Elf people. You can think of it that way. So they're defending the shrine, and Anarian decides to step into the flames of the Shrine of Assyrian. And this is supposed to scald him, like just completely engulf him in flames and otherwise kill him. Instead, he comes out unscathed with all of the power of Assyrian, because Assyrian asks like, hey, yo, I need your help, my dog. Assyrian goes, yo, I got you. Here's a little bit of my power. So he pops out on the other end of this, and he has, for the most part, the ability to conquer demons at a whim, more or less. So he basically, there's a part in the book where he talks about going outside of the shrine after going through the flames and just chucks a spear through a demon's heart, just outright kills him, boom, and then walks up to the demon's weapon, takes it, and then slays the whole entire army that's outside of the Shrine of Assyrian with the elves in tow. From there, though, it creates the beginning of the elves kind of march to war. They become a war host at this point, and Anarian, he teams up with Calidor Dragon Tamer, and he's the greatest wizard of this time. Again, they don't really know about the lizardmen, so they can't really say, oh yeah, we're as good as this land. Not true. But Anarian and Calidor basically build up all of Ulthuan. Calidor trains people in magic, Anarian trains them in war. So Calidor like basically swears fealty to him, and he becomes the first, like I was saying, Phoenix King. And after Anarian does this, he basically he goes through a series of wars with these demons. They describe it described as centuries long. So there's hundreds of years that they're fighting these demons. There's moments of peace. There's moments of grotesque warfare. There's back and forth. So there's no real respite from this demon incursion. And in Avalorn, there's the Everqueen, like I was saying, and Anarian chooses her as his queen, and that becomes a staple of all of the Phoenix Kings from then on. They have to marry the Everqueen, And from there, they basically combine and reunite the two portions of elfdom between Anarian, or I'm sorry, between the Syrian, and I cannot remember the who Everlorn is the patron, the patron of. There's an actual goddess in charge. I think it's Aisha. I can't really remember, but someone, if you know in the comments, please just go ahead and comment on it. But still, you've got this union between these two. They have kids, and basically, Anarian's got this great life. He's the head of Ulthuan. He's got a wife in the Everqueen. He's got his best friend, Calidor Dragon Tamer, and things are kind of looking good. Things are looking great, but then there's a massive demon invasion again. And this is kind of the theme of the early High Elf history. And this invasion hits Averlorn in specific. And what it does is it wipes out Averlorn. And in that wipeout, of course, the Everqueen is killed. And this is like being the wife of Anarian, he gets incensed. And what he does is he decides to go to the Blighted Isle, to the Shrine of Cain, and pull what's called the Widowmaker, or the Sword of Cain. And this is supposed to give the wielder a little bit of Cain's power. And Cain is another god of the High Elves, or eventually the patron of the Dark Elves, and he's the god of death. And he, of slaughter, of blood, of just pretty much anything pertaining to warfare and explicitly. And everyone's warning him, hey, you know, you shouldn't do this. Why don't you chill for a little bit? This is very ill-advised, because Cain is a mad god. And by doing that, you're going to take a little bit of Cain, and that's going to make you bitter and angry, and you're going to become cruel and cold. It sounds like a dark elf, huh? But that's kind of what he does. He flies up to the Blighted Isle. He's got his dragon that you've seen here in this picture, in Dragnir, who is the father, not really the father of dragons, but the oldest and best dragon, as it were. And he takes his dragon to the Shrine of Cain, and walks up to it, pulls that damn sword, and there's a really nice flowery portion of the book where they talk about how the elf gods are whispering to him, saying, hey, turn back, don't do this. And right before he pulls the sword, his wife appears before him, the Everqueen, and says, hey, please don't do this. You don't need to do this. And he just does it anyway, you know, just like you do. And from there, it slowly starts to change Anarian. Close to the Blighted Isle from that picture we were looking at before of Ulthuan is Nagaraith, and he takes up his court there. That's where he rules from, and he slowly becomes more and more twisted. He takes a second wife in Marathai, who is, as we've discussed before, Malekith's mother, and she's a Cirrus at the time, and she's known for her beauty and everything. But through Marathai, Anarian and Marathai obviously have a second son in Malekith, as I was saying. And from there, it's seen that he is cruel to all of his people in Nagaraith, and a lot of people start to fear his council and fear his court. Calidor Dragon Tamer leaves Nagaraith and goes to his town, or his nation. It's kind of hard to assume which one this is, but it's called Calidor. Goes back there, takes all of his dragons with him, which sounds kind of petty, like, I'm going to leave, I'm going to take my damn dragons with me. But he retreats back to Calidor, and this pisses off Anarian. He's just not having it. But, of course, in fitting with the theme of things, there is another large demon invasion. And this demon invasion is so huge that Anarian knows right off the bat, oh, we are not going to win this one. And prior to this, there had already been some infighting between Anarian and Calidor. Calidor wants to use an invocation or a ritual or a spell, anything they can think of to neutralize the presence of the demons by consuming all of those winds of magic that they use to keep themselves bound to this plane. And Anarian looks at that as, even though he knows that Calidor is right, he looks at it as cowardice, and no, we've got to defeat them on the battlefield. You know, the typical warrior versus wizard mentality of brain versus brawn. But Calidor, seeing this second invasion, says, you know what? Screw it. I have to take matters into my own hand. He takes all of his dragons and flies to the Isle of the Dead. And that's where he begins the ritual. And we've seen this from the trailer that we saw for Warhammer Total War 2. You saw those council of mages around that one big pinion of light. That's the great ritual to create the great vortex. A lot of great going on there. But the book describes as these two hosts of elves meeting. You've got all of the elves from Nagarath pouring out, and all of elfdom pretty much coming to the aid of Calidor. And Calidor has brought so many dragons that it darkens the skies. And there's a really cool dynamic of elves and dragons. All of the elves sleep in Calidor, in the mountains and everything. And in order to bring those dragons to the fore, they have to go and wake them. And they have this special waking ceremony with like these songs and everything. It's very flowery and poetic in the same way that you would imagine high fantasy to be. But it's really kind of cool how elves have command of dragons, of phoenixes, of these great eagles. So imagine this very shiny, very ornate war host against this very disgusting, shambled, demonic host. It's very iconic of typical order versus chaos, very light versus dark. And on the Isle of the Dead, this great ritual starts, and Anarion is trying to defend Calidor and the mages that are doing this ritual. And again, Calidor is the strongest mage at the time, but if you think about it, elves haven't, like I was saying, been exposed to sorcery in a negative way, in a way to destroy and banish things for as long as they've been around. It was only a new thing with these demon invasions. So I imagine if this was something done by like lizard men, it would have been like, oh, you know what, bibbity bobbity boop, I'm a slan, there you go. I'm gonna go have a hot dog, suck this one down. But with the elves, it starts to slowly burn their minds out and destroy them from the inside out as they do this ritual to create this vortex that is going to consume all of the rampant magical energy and the winds of magic that are swirling around the world of Malice. Now, you guys haven't probably seen this much from the gameplay, but demons in the Warhammer world are bound to certain gods. There's 4 of them: Tznich, Khorne, Nurgle, and Slaanesh. And it's always really interesting to hear how people pronounce those 4. But each one has got a different attribute and a very characteristic look. But there's 4 greater demons, each one representing one of these gods, is on that isle, and Anarion lands on that with Andrognir to destroy them. And it's not said that a man, or a mortal in any case, can square off one-on-one with these, but he's so filled with like the power of Assyrian from walking through the flames, imbued with a bit of Cain from the Widowmaker, and just sheer determination. So he squares off with these guys, going toe-to-toe, toes of the fucking line, and kills them one by one. And you can see in this picture, you've got Anarion fighting against a greater demon of Slaanesh, and in the background, you've got Andrognir strangling a bloodthirster, a greater demon of Khorne. And that's kind of, there's a book that came out that describes this whole battle, and it's just this gruesome blood for blood, blow for blow battle, in which case Anarion is mortally wounded as well as Andrognir. But the ritual completes itself, and at the end of it, rather than it kind of saying, oh, whew, there we go, guys, we won at the last 2 seconds of the countdown on the bomb. Nope, not quite. Instead, it locks all of the mages involved in that ritual inside of the vortex, creating this giant vortex at the center of Ulthuan that sucks up the rampant winds of magic, greatly depleting the strength of the demons in the world, in Malice. And with this, Anarion mounts Andrognir and flies back to the Blighted Isles as he's dying. So the world of Ulthuan is pretty much saved, more or less, but at the cost of Calidor. All those mages are locked inside of that vortex, and you've got a mortally wounded Anarion. And Anarion flies back to the Blighted Isle, and it again, a very flowery wording as it talks about Andrognir giving out above the Shrine of Cain, crashing onto the shores of the island as Anarion drives the sword back into the shrine and walks back to Andrognir to die on next to his one of his best friends, I would assume. I mean, do high elves look at dragons like I look at dogs? I'm going to assume that's the way it is. But that's the way that Anarion really passes from this age. And what that leads to is you've got Marathai and Malekith that are left as his successors, more or less. And the way the Phoenix King is elected, it is elected. It's not implied. He's not just the Phoenix King because he's Anarian's blood. He's the Phoenix King because the Council of Princes of all those other nations of Ulthuan elect the Phoenix King. But we're going to get into that a little bit more with the history of the Dark Elves. But after this, we start the reign of Belshazzar, and how that really sets the table for the eventual rise of the Dark Elves and the great High Elf Dark Elf Civil War. But that we'll get to more. I'm excited to see as they launch more of Total Warhammer 2, what that's going to include and what we get to see and what units are going to be there. I'm excited. I'm pretty sure that we're going to see some Tyrion and some Teclis. We've already seen Teclis from the trailer. But if you guys do have any questions about anything you've heard today, or if you want to know more about the High Elves in general, I was going to do maybe a unit by unit breakdown of the stuff in the book, but I'm not sure if that's as wanted. So you guys let me know if that's what you're looking for. I can definitely do a video on that. But be on the lookout for some more videos here. Turn and I are going to be doing some live casts, some co-op campaigns. I've got some more solo campaign coming up. But thanks for watching, guys. Have a good one, and don't forget to sub. Bye. With the launch of Total War Warhammer 2 just around the corner, there's a lot of exciting things still to talk about the lore of Total War Warhammer 2, about the lore of some of the respective races that are going to be in it. And in today's little video here, I wanted to talk about the ancient feud between the High Elves and the Dwarves. This is known by many names. You know, it's got the War of the Beard if you're High Elves, War of the Ancients if you're humans, or War of Vengeance if you're Dwarfs. And this is a pretty integral conflict. It happened 2,000 years way before Sigmar. So it's a very early conflict in the world of Warhammer. And it explains and kind of shows you the results of why the current state of the geopolitical climate, as it is, of the High Elves and Dwarfs, as well as what causes the rise to power of some other factions in the Warhammer world. And this conflict devastated both races pretty significantly, and it hurt the ruling classes of both, and empowered a lot of both the invaders as well as some of the people that lie on the outskirts of not just the people that were the big players in this, the belligerents as they're called, but also the people that could benefit from a weakened High Elf or Dwarf empire. So with this, we'll jump right on into the War of the Beard, starting with the early history of this, the precursor, you know. And what we really have here is the Age of Discovery, and this is when the elves are exploring out from Ulthuan. You know, they're allying with other races, and they're moving out from the demon incursions that have happened in the past couple centuries with Anarian. And dwarfs have established the Karaz Angkor at its height at this point. So all throughout the World's Edge Mountains, with Karak Norn all the way down south in the Southlands. All the mountains going over into Batonia. So the dwarfs have really expanded at this point. And this grand alliance begins. Dwarfs crafting mighty weapons and armor for the elves, and the elves, on the other hand, teaching them them being the dwarfs, how to enchant, as well as literature, art, artistic trade skills, as it is. And this is what really brought a combination of cultures here. You've got the elven silk and steel, the dwarf armor, weapons, and alcohol, really. I mean, to this point, elves do have alcohol, but not the pungent stuff that dwarves do. And you don't get Gromril and Ithelmar from this, but Gromril being the special armor of the dwarfs, and Ithelmar being the special armor, well, aside from dragon armor, of the High Elves. And these are the two of the rarest and strongest armors in the Warhammer world. Now, there's nowhere in the lore that it talks about the armor being influenced by one or the other, but I'm sure that without the methods in this early alliance, one could not exist without the other. So Gromril in and of itself is like basically forged from like meteorites or the such. It's like called star armor or something of that sort. Those of you, the dwarfs experts, can definitely correct me on that. But the ability to enchant it, I'm sure, comes from this knowledge of enchantment through the elves. And the Ithelmar's craftsmanship, I'm sure, come through the dwarf craftsmanship with armor and weapons as well. So I'm sure that these two armors benefit. That's purely conjecture. There's nowhere in the book that it says these two come from this, but these armors, I'm sure, come about from this alliance, down the line at least. There's this big elf town that's established near Marienburg. It's got an exotic name here, Sith Rinosak Naminstir. And this is essentially the High Elf Kingdom in the Old World. That's what they're called, their Sea Elves at this point. And they act as traders, diplomats, and the eyes and ears of the Phoenix King in the Old World. So you have the dwarfs kind of talking through the High Elves at this point near Marienburg. And back then, it was a sizable portion of the former High Elf Empire. During this time, though, Malekith was not a armor-bound bastard, so he actually becomes the ambassador to the dwarfs, spending a lot of time in their holds, learning their culture, kind of becoming what the Lord of the Rings would call a dwarf friend, and getting quite close to them. And this knowledge would actually set the scene for the initial kindling of the War of the Beard soon to come, because after this early history, you've got the Age of Sundering. And this is the Elvish Civil War that we know, that sees the murder of Belshazzar, who is the very first Phoenix King after Anarion. And as you guys know, Malekith was passed up for succession to the Phoenix King, to the Phoenix King. I said Phoenix Kingdom, which I guess would be Ulthuan, by Belshazzar. And this is really the birth of the Dark Elves as a whole, and like I was saying, the kindling for everything. Because from this point, it depends on how you want to pronounce this, Druki or Druchi. I like Druchi, but I know it's Druki. Raiding party starts attacking dwarf caravans, and they're all dressed as Asur, which are the High Elves. Just to note that High Elves are called Asur in their language, and Dark Elves are called Druki in theirs. So these settlements are razed to the ground, and so it's important to note that, High Elf, the relationship between the High Elves and the dwarfs is so strong at this point that the High Elf, or the Dark Elf masquerading as High Elves, are killing dwarfs, razing settlements to the ground, and there's still not a war. There's not a conflict right outside of it. Like, they're kind of saying, like, oh, okay, there must be something going on here. So, but it does cause a high amount of tension. It's very, very high. There's a lot of sanctions and grudges being written in the Great Book, a lot of restrictions. Things are coming to a boiling point. But again, it's worth noting that things don't immediately turn into a conflict the second that one thing happens. There's a bit of a back and forth and says, hey, this stuff's going to happen as a result of you being a shithead, more or less. But this is where things really get a bit dicey, since you do have the perspective of this war from both the High Elves and the dwarfs. It tends to get a little bit different on what actually happens. What side of the coin are you kind of reading about? So the elves talk about pleading with the dwarfs and them being ignorant/stubborn. The dwarfs talk about trying to avert disaster with the elves, and the elves themselves being cold and arrogant to their pleas. Dwarfs in general are at a high tension as well as this, and around that time, Karak Zorn is no longer heard from in the south. So dwarfs, like I was saying, generally they're kind of on edge. Things are going wrong in the Karazhan Corps. This is leading up to a big moment in their history that we'll talk about later, but. And they kind of think Karak Zorn, by the way, was suspected to have been overrun by lizardmen. So at this time, you've got the Phoenix King Kalidor II, and you've got High King Gotrek Starbreaker. Those are the two heads of state. So Gotrek appeals directly to Kalidor II, and the elves, being kind of secretive about the civil war that they just went through, are kind of also at high tension as well. So they're both kind of like at DEFCON 4 without even knowing about it to each other. So the Phoenix King is denying all this is happening, and he asks for a direct claim in person from High King Gotrek. So the dwarfs are rightfully pissed off. So they send Forek Grimbach, who is the ambassador, to appeal directly to the Phoenix King. And the elves didn't really think this was a real issue. Like I was saying, they kind of thought that this was a hoax or blown out of proportion. But as soon as Grimbach arrives, the high elves kind of start to come around to, like, okay, maybe this is real. But Kalidor, on the other hand, is not. So Kalidor actually shaves Grimbach's beard after he persists that this is actually happening. Grimbach saying, like, hey, no, this is real, trust me, and kicks him out of the court. This is what really kicks the war into full effect as Grimbach returns to Gotrek beardless, and that is a huge dishonor for dwarves. And in fact, he actually becomes a slayer as a result of this to kind of, you know, bring his name back to good grace. But even though no one really kind of holds this against him, but that's the kind of the self-riddled honor that dwarves have. So what this really starts is then the War of Vengeance, and eventually which becomes the time of woes for the dwarves. That's important to kind of note. Because a year later, the dwarfs march for war on Tor Alessi, and Tor Alessi is now present-day Lingui. It's really hard for me to pronounce this word because I am not French. L'Anguille. This is the one that's right next to Coron in Bretonnia, but currently at this point is part of the High Elf Empire. So Kaladar gets rightfully quite angry with this. And at this time, it's important to remember that the High Elves are still reeling from the Sundering like I was talking about. But they are in no way diminished as far as a race goes. They're still very, very, very strong. What really diminishes them is the 1-2-3 punch of the demon incursions prior to this, the Sundering that just happened, and the War of the Beard that's about to happen. So Kalador launches a massive fleet from Ulthuan to Tor Alessi to relieve the besieged elves. And in general, it's talked about how the elves are pretty remorseful at this point in the story. Again, this really depends on what book you're reading, but the dwarves talk about elves being blood-crazed and insane, and the elves talk about the dwarves being blood-crazed and insane. So really, it depends on what side you fall on. I, being a lore buff and trying to give you an unbiased point, clearly side with the High Elves. The dwarves are insane. Who would listen to a bunch of people that smell like cabbage? But moving on from that, you've got Snorri Halfhand, and this is Gotrek's son, and he challenges Kalador to open combat. And Kalador, just to kind of backstep here a little bit, has sent a massive fleet out to Tor Alessi. This is the largest fleet to have ever touched the waters from the High Elves. And there's a lot of that in the Warhammer world. There's a lot of kind of pandering to the point of like, this is the largest fleet. This is the most courageous warrior. He is the best fighter. Like Tyrion's the best fighter. Abhorrish is the best fighter. Wulfric is the best fighter. Everyone's the best fighter of their own faction, basically. But it is talk about this massive naval invasion, naval kind of relief of Tor Alessi, and Snorri Halfhand challenging Kalador to open combat. Kalador then kills him, and the rest of the elves retreat due to just constant losses, and that's going to be a repeating motif here. And this becomes this kind of multi-year retreat throughout modern-day Bretonnia. It's reminiscent of Washington fleeing from the British, but, you know, not with the purpose of trying to forego the actual combat that ensues, like Washington did. Smarter general. But the elves trying to stem these massive losses, they eventually get to a point where they do have to have another fight, and the Battle of Orgar begins. And this is really one with another conflict with casualties on both sides being extremely high. It's described in the book as having rivers of blood. Prince Imladrik, who is a High Elf prince, fights Morgrim Baugrim in single combat and dies. And dwarves say it's a glorious, honorable duel. Elves say he sacrifices himself to sate the dwarves' bloodlust. Again, it really depends on which book you're reading. Because like in the High Elf book, it talks about how poor Prince Imladrik walks out in front of the blood-crazed Morgrim Baugrim and drops to his knees, pleading for him to end the conflict, and Morgrim takes his head off. And in the book, for dwarfs, it talks about how they get into a glorious duel. Like, so it really just depends on what's going on. The High Elves have a tendency to be manipulative and at the same time trying to skew facts. So do the dwarfs don't necessarily try to skew facts, but I would say they're definitely very manipulative and vainglorious. So Morgrim becomes a hero from this. He becomes the Elgidum, or Elgidum, which is Elf Doom. And the rest of the elves retreat from this conflict. And Morgrim becomes really a new heir to the throne because he's the cousin of Snorri Halfhand. And the elves then, trying to get some sort of victory here, march on Karak Azul, the home of where all the best dwarf smiths are. And the elf offensive really catches them by surprise. And the superior numbers as well allows them to almost overwhelm the inhabitants. But, and this is a really cool guy in the lore, Brock Stonefist rallies the defenders in a grand counterattack through the tunnel systems, routing the High Elf army and earning 2 nicknames. Because he knows these tunnels so well. He knows them like the back of his hands. And the High Elves are not accustomed to fighting through the Karak of a dwarf. It's not part of their previous conflicts. Their conflicts from the past have been with other elves and with demons. So they don't have a lot of knowledge of the depths. So he gets these 2 nicknames. One, Lord of the Tunnels, which is Ungrin and Ancor Rick, and the Nightmare of the Depths, which the High Elves give him. Lord of the Tunnels clearly being from the dwarves, but the High Elves name him the Nightmare of the Depths, which is Arcane Phoenix. All these really cool kind of elf and dwarf names kind of come out of this, and we see a lot of elf and dwarf names on things as we look on the battle map or the campaign map for Total War Warhammer 1 and 2, but it's really kind of cool to get the almost the Lord of the Rings level treatment of all this stuff. You've got all these great things in Lord of the Rings with like Glamdring and Orcust, who is a guy who watches these videos and will comment on that. Says, hey, thanks for the call out. But there's a lot of stuff in Lord of the Rings that talks about the former days of the High Elves and the former elves, High Elves, Blue Elves, Red Elves, they all exist. And the former days of the dwarfs, and how it's almost this romantic poetry when it comes to talking about it. And it's very much the same with the War of the Beard. But eventually, Brock Stonefist crosses swords with Lord Salandor of Tor Acre, A-C-H-A-R-E, and thus begins their kind of grand feud that lasts a century of constant battles and clashes. And you know, the Battle of Blind Rivers being one of them. There's not a whole ton of details on that, but this is something to note here, that this is a centuries-long conflict. This is not just a handful of years here. And Morgrim eventually marches on Athel Mariah in what is now modern-day Northwest Bretonia. Modern-day, you know, like it really exists. But this is this scenic and beautiful elven city that Morgrim just burns and razes to the ground. And the mighty conclusion to Salandor and Stonefist is that as this city is burning down around them, they're last seen fighting to the bitter end in the flames of the town. And they even talk about how if you go to this town now, the ruins of it at least, you can see their ghosts fighting till bitter end, which is just kind of awesome. But this kind of becomes this stalemate. The High Elves can't siege the mountain holds of the dwarfs, and the dwarfs can't break the walls of Toralessi. So it's this 450 some odd year conflict that is just costing both factions heavy amounts of casualties. And the majority of Athelorn at this time was completely destroyed. So you do have a lot of bystanders being destroyed in this conflict that eventually, you know, it sours things down the road. But you again have this grand moment, though, that does end this stalemate in the Battle of the Three Towers. This is the 14th and final siege of Toralessi. 14 times. Keep that number in mind. So it's 100+ days of constant sieging of the walls. And keep in mind, too, as well, that at this time, the dwarfs don't have any black powder. So you can imagine how fruitful sappers and engineers, as well as catapults and ballistae, are going to be against elven towers and fortresses and castles. So finally, the dwarfs got through the wall, which they had essentially obliterated to get through it. But Gotrek, Starbreaker, and Kalidor square off for one final duel. And this lasts, like they say in the books, 3 long days of constant fighting. They don't stop at any one point. They're just constantly exchanging blows. But the story really differs from here. It gets really different from here again. So for the elves, Kalidor tried to surrender himself to Gotrek to get him to see reason and put an end to the fighting. But again, you'll notice that this sounds familiar, the blood-crazed dwarf slew him and stole away with his phoenix crown. This effectively ended the war and considered the grudge complete. For the dwarves, Kalidor gets tired during their 3-day-long duel, and Gotrek seizes the upper hand, disarming him and breaking his sword with Grimnir, the rune axe, as we all know the name of. Kalidor then begs for his life, and he swears to surrender, and as you would assume, Gotrek kills him after he tries to make peace. Because Gotrek was thinking, I can't trust him. If this is what's making him want to sow for peace, then he's not genuine in his actions, and thus justice demands he dies. So again, he does take the crown because that does sort of say, hey, I'm considering this grudge completed now. So the High Elves try to start a campaign to return the crown, but actually get interrupted by a massive invasion of Ulthuan by Malekith. And this is, again, exactly what he wants. Malekith raises the grand fortress city of Anlek from the ocean, and then invades into Ulthuan from there. So how does this result, or what is the result of this conflict? Really what happens is both factions are severely depleted. High Elves declare that all loyal subjects of Ulthuan must return to the homeland to help defend against the Dark Elf incursion. That's because they're so depleted from this conflict that they need every elf on deck pretty much. And a lot of the settlers in the old world get a pretty bad taste in their mouth, so they settle in Athel Loren. The dwarfs at that time completely destroy the sea elf town I was talking about here. It's kind of got a exotic name, so I'm going to try it one more time. Sith Rinosak Namithahir. So they completely destroy that. So a lot of these elves are homeless. So they retreat to Athel Loren. And this sect grows substantially and eventually becomes the Wood Elves. And the Wood Elves themselves are still connected, in essence, to the High Elves, especially through the World Roots and the World Tree. But they're very much separate. They don't answer to the Phoenix King. If anything, they answer to the Everqueen, who is directly connected to the spiritual portion of the High Elves and the Wood Elves on the same level there. And the dwarfs, despite winning, weaken themselves so much that they can no longer fight off the Skaven and Greenskin incursions that are coming through their tunnels, through their underway and everything. And this is not at an actual one, but there's more and more that come that they just can't defend against. And this is what really kicks off the Times of Woe, with the war being the precursor. Either way, though, both factions killed hundreds of thousands of each other and essentially dethroned each other as their masters of the world. Before this point, you've got the High Elves and the Dwarfs pretty much being in control of everything. There's the Greenskin tribes, there's Skaven here and there, and there's Lizardmen all abound, but Lizardmen have been massively dethroned as well from their former seat of power after the last demon invasion with Anarian and the High Elves. And from there, you pretty much have the next race to rise to power, which is Sigmar and the humans, which comes to fruition now towards the end of this conflict. This conflict takes centuries, as we found out. So this kind of gives you guys a really good idea to what happens between the beginning of the High Elf timeline, when they are masters of the world, more or less, at post-Lizardmen, and the beginning of the Lizardmen timeline as well, where they're masters of the old world, of the, I almost said the Northlands, but not the Southlands, but they're masters of the entire World's Edge Mountains and the mountains that extend into Britonium. They're the masters of this place. And the War of the Beard is what really sets the table for what becomes the Warhammer world as we know it today. This is a very important conflict, and it is honestly one of my favorite ones in the book, because both sides tell it so differently and so rich and so full of so much color. Again, like I was saying, the dwarves talking about so much honor and the High Elves talking about so much, like, we tried to sacrifice and do all these things. Who's to say which one's right? Probably the High Elves. But thanks for watching here today, guys. We got plenty more videos to come out this week. Hopefully some goodies will be released from Creative Assembly as well, but we'll be doing one on the Elf Pantheon as well to kind of segue into this, or segue from this into that, and some other stuff planned as well. But thanks for watching as always. Have a good one and take care. So one thing we haven't done in a long time, or at least about a week or so, is a good Lorehammer video here. So we're going to get back to our typical production of the lore of the Warhammer world. There's been a lot of excitement with Total War Warhammer 2 having now come out. I know I've not stopped playing the High Elves since it came out for the most part, and that's actually going to play pretty well into this video here, because today we're going to go through the legendary lords of the High Elf Kingdom of Ulthuan. And these are the lords from the tabletop, but it's pretty safe to say that these are a lot of the lords that we could expect in future DLC, or maybe in the third game as additional characters for the High Elves. Who really knows? But a lot of what we're going to talk about today, we're going to do the same style that we usually do. I'll read the actual lore blurb from the book directly. We'll go through some of the actual special rules and mechanics of those characters and talk about how they're probably going to translate into a Total War Warhammer 2. So
We'll go through each lord as we always do, and hopefully you guys will get a better understanding. I'm pretty excited to do this video here. I love the High Elves, as you guys do know, and I'm really excited to tell you guys a lot about these legendary lords that didn't quite make it into the game just yet, because they're all really diverse and really amazing to me. So I'm really excited to tell you guys about everything here coming up. We'll actually start with one of my favorite and one of the lords I use the most. Eltharion the Grim, the Warden of Tor Ivris. Eltharion the Grim is one of the greatest of all Elven lords. Many times has he achieved what would have been thought impossible. It was Eltharion who was the first of Ulthuan's generals to dare an assault on Nagaron itself and live to speak of it, and he who finally brought about the defeat of Wog Grom. For his valor in that battle, Eltharion was elected Warden of Tor Ivris, and though he is a dour ruler, the people of that fair city love him dearly. Eltharion's early rule was split equally between scouring greenskins from the land and overseeing repairs to Tor Ivris' network of waystones. In the first task, Eltharion was aided by the nobles of his realm, who rallied to his banner with an enthusiasm not seen for many long generations. In the second, he sought the assistance of the Loremaster Belinar. Though Eltharion had successfully stabilized the waystone of Tor Ivris, he felt that luck had guided his hand rather than more than judgment in that task, and he did not wish to see ill fortune or rashness on his part destroy Ulthuan. With his realm thus secured, Eltharion took his blade overseas, not to the chill shores of Nagaroth in the west, but to the east, to the lands of the Old World and beyond. Ivris had but barely endured the onset of one Wa, and Eltharion swore that no other would ever reach the shores of Ulthuan. Atop his griffin Stormwing, Eltharion swept through the Badlands like a wind of blades. He slaughtered war bosses and ran their armies to ruin. He toppled orc fortresses that had survived earthquakes, Bretonnian crusades, and the vengeance of the dwarfs. Yet, miraculously, there always seemed more greenskins for him to fight. Finally, Eltharion learned the truth. His reputation had spread so far and so wide that war bosses were actually seeking his army, knowing that the pointy-head would give him a proper fight. This revelation ended Eltharion's battles in the Badlands. He now knew that to continue would not abate the greenskin threat. Returning to Ivris, Eltharion began to train his armies and fortify its cities as never before. The next time Wa made landfall on the shores of Ulthuan, the folk of Ivris and their grim warden would be ready for them. So we have a really, really cool lord here, and he's a pretty diverse hybrid lord. I mean, we don't really have that truly with High Elves right now. High Elves, we've got Tyrion and we've got Teclis. Tyrion is very clearly a legendary lord of combat, of a warrior variety, and Teclis is, you know, the high lore master of Hoeth. So it's like, you know, you've got two cut and dry ones. When you look at the Dark Elves, though, Malekith is very hybrid. He's very much like a Manfred von Karstein, only on steroids and in a Darth Vader suit. And you've got Morathai, who is definitely way more of a caster, but she can get a little, she can toss a little around a little bit. But Eltharion, so for starters, we've heard about Stormwing. Stormwing is his griffin, and to my surprise, griffin are not a choice, a mount, or an actual monster in the High Elf army, and that's really, really, really weird to me, because griffins have always been like the staple of the High Elf mount. You've got, like, they didn't have Great Eagles as a mount for the longest time. I think they got those in like 7th edition or some shit. But the Griffins, like, Eltharion has a pretty rocky history too. Eltharion in like editions 1 through 4 is on his Griffin. In editions 5 and 6, I think it is, either one or both, he is blinded and he's only on foot and he only has his sword. He kind of looks like a Jedi, like a long-haired Legolas Jedi. And then he comes back onto his Griffin here in his kind of full resplendent armor, as you've seen from the picture. Now, they've done a lot with Eltharion, but he was very much one of the iconic rulers, or at least special characters of the High Elves for a long time, especially in the early editions. So it was just a really big surprise to me that we didn't see any Griffins. I didn't need to see Eltharion. It was pretty obvious to me we were going to get Tyrion or Teclis, but Griffins was, again, huge. So Eltharion would hopefully bring Griffins to the High Elf army as a mount choice. I mean, I think that they've done this before with, and you guys got to correct me if I'm wrong on this, because I wasn't around when the DLC was announced, or the DLC came out for Total War Warhammer 1. I came back right when Beastman came out, but I think that they added Manticores as a mount to Chaos, and they weren't originally, and I can't recall, maybe to the Chaos Sorcerer lores, and I can't recall 100%. So I do think they have a precedent of adding mounts to lords in retrospect, so hopefully they'll do that with the High Elves and the Griffins. But Eltharion has got this Griffin mount. He himself is a pretty big badass. I mean, he's got a really high weapon skill. He's pretty comparable. He's just a little bit below Tyrion as far as tabletop goes. He's got this ability though called Blood Oath, which basically makes it so he's got his sworn enemy is orcs and goblins. So maybe with Eltharion, and I guess kind of going on to a bigger kind of small tangent here, if you haven't noticed in Total War Warhammer 2, you don't choose factions, you choose lords, which are associated with certain factions. So it would make a lot of sense to me if we saw a Tor Ivris faction or a Wardens of Tor Ivris, and they were out on the Badlands or out on the Southlands, maybe when the Mortal Empires DLC comes out, or FLC. But that would be really cool because we don't have a High Elf presence in the Southlands at all. We've got the New World, we've got Ulthuan, which is really close to Naggaroth, or Naggaroth, so it would make a lot of sense to, we don't need to see one up there, but maybe if we had him on the Wardens of Tor Ivris over right around where the Crusader Knights are, or maybe where the Badlands are, where the Savage Orcs are, that'd be really cool to me. I'd be really excited to see High Elves already kind of getting a foothold in the Old World without having to go across the seas from Ulthuan. So that'd be a great option for Eltharion to start. But he has this Blood Oath thing that basically makes it so that he fights well against Grom the Paunch. So I'm not sure if they're going to do like a tandem release like they've done for some things, like the Grim and the Grave with Grom the Paunch and Eltharion. But he definitely would have some sort of line in his skills that would give him a like as far as a campaign ability that would give him a bonus against orcs and gobs, greenskins in general. But if we're looking at his magic items here, he's got the Fang Sword of Eltharion. This rune-encrusted longsword has been passed down through Eltharion's family for generations. And basically it's just a kind of a pretty conventional lord magic weapon here, but the way I would look at it as a actual campaign characteristic is it would increase his melee attack and maybe his actual weapon strength, because it doesn't really do much outside of that. It increases his personal strength, and armor saves can't be allowed, so maybe it'll add AP to him if he doesn't have it already. The Helm of Ivris. The Helm of Ivris is the ceremonial crown of the warden of that proud city, and this actually gives him a small ward save. So I could see that being, and that's very common for High Elves. A lot of factions benefit from one specific kind of repeating motif, and in this case, the High Elves have a ton of ward saves, and the High Magic actually increases that ward save ability, and we've seen that with the actual lore attribute for Teclis and the High Mages. So that would be a really awesome thing with the Helm of Ivris giving him that additional ward save. Then he's got the Talisman of Hoeth, and this is what makes him a hybrid lord. So this finely wrought medallion allows its wearer a measure of the original warden's magical knowledge. So basically this talisman actually turns him into a level 2 wizard on tabletop. So they don't really have levels in this game, but I guess you could compare it to a hero wizard versus a lord level wizard, like Teclis versus, say, just a standard high elf mage. So maybe with that, we will see Eltharion having the ability to cast a certain set amount of spells. Maybe he'll have access to like the Lore Master of Hoeth spells, which are basically the basic entry level spell of every single, well, the majority of the Winds of Magic. So I would be really interested to see that, how they incorporate that ability into Eltharion. Like maybe he doesn't have it to start, but as soon as he gets the Talisman of Hoeth from campaign, he can grant it. Or it's a high cost item for multiplayer. And in all honesty, if Eltharion made it into the game in even an inkling of his tabletop iteration, he'd be a very competitive lord. Griffins aren't too shabby. They're really strong, kind of middle ground between, say, like a great eagle and a dragon, or just something where it's they don't have the staying power of a dragon, but they can definitely challenge the board because they do cause terror. So they do have a lot of characteristics going for them. So if we were to see Eltharion, he would be he wouldn't directly be the answer to a Malekith, but he would definitely be the kind of hybrid lord I think that the High Elves really need right now. And maybe giving him an anti-large or an anti-infantry characteristic. I would hope for maybe an anti-large, because if he is prone to fighting greenskins, namely like Grom the Paunch and the such, he's used to fighting larger creatures. And the Griffin itself, you know, built for battle, so hopefully we'll see something like that. I think that the High Elves in the current meta right now need an Eltharion the Grin to be able to be more flexible to the threats that are on the board right now, because in Total War Warhammer 2 there's so many different things that can challenge them in so many different ways that they need an Eltharion or some of the other lords we're about to talk about. But that's Eltharion the Grim, the Warden of Tor Ivris. We'll jump into a pretty big fan favorite here, Alith Anar, the Shadow King. Tradition maintains that the Nagaraith chose Alith Anar as ruler after Malekith fled into the west. The Lord was the last heir of a great line, his forebears having been slain by the Witch King's minions. In those days, there were many Dark Elves still hiding in Ulthuan, and Alith Anar took to their eradication with a vengeance. Those of his foes who were not killed in battle were crucified upon the trees, where those who passed could witness their grisly fate, and as he attacked and burned each enemy encampment, his fame grew. After the Battle of Griffin Pass, Alith Anar captured 700 Dark Elves and had them nailed high upon the white cliffs overlooking the narrow valley, where they hung until they died. The corpses were suspended for years afterwards, until their flesh rotted and their bones tumbled into piles beside the road. Such is the power of the place that these bones can be seen to this day, together with the red marks left by Alith Anar's iron nails upon the cliffs. Years later, Alith Anar led his warriors out of Nagaraith, and against the newly raised fortress of Nagaroth. The Shadow Warriors soon became a thorn in the Witch King's side, harassing his ships, ambushing his warriors, and plundering his convoys. There was nothing the Shadow Warriors would not dare. It was said that a disguised Alith Anar danced with Morathai at the court of the Witch King, before stealing the Stone of Midnight from her treasury. Mortified, Morathai sent witch elves to hunt him down, but he tricked them into drinking poison mixed with blood, and so escaped to Ulthuan, where his warriors hailed him as the Shadow King. None know Alith Anar's final fate. The Shadow Warriors believe he still walks the world, a restless spirit of vengeance. They tell that on the darkest night of the season of frost, a grey-garbed figure can be seen kneeling before Aelthilur's tomb, head bowed in silent contemplation of the bloody deeds the coming year will bring. Other high elves scoff at such tales, but few amongst them would not wish to be proven wrong. For his part, the Witch King has passed beyond the veil of mortal concerns, but if Malekith any longer fears anything, he fears the vengeance of Alith Anar. We have your Shadow Warrior, your kind of hit-and-run style ranged lord for the high elves, and we've seen a very we don't see a lot of ranged lords. I feel in Total War Warhammer. I mean, we see some that are more hybrid style with Orion, but we haven't seen anything kind of like Alith Anar, who doesn't really have the staying power of an Orion, because Alith Anar would be very kind of almost like a souped up Waystalker, because if you look at it, his magic items, he's got this thing called the Stone of Midnight, which is just talked about. This jewel was originally gifted to Morathai by an Aryan and cloaks the wearer in shadows. So what it would actually do is give him a ward save, but it would also give him a bonus to defense and the way this makes it sound, in addition, enemies suffer a -1 penalty to hit when shooting against Alith Anar or any unit he has joined. So I see that as his leadership aura confers a bonus defense to ranged. So that way, maybe Alith Anar either gets stock from that capability, or he gets this ability that makes the range do less damage to him. That's how I could really see that being factored into this game. Or the Shadow Crown. The Shadow Crown is the symbol of the rightful rulers of Nagaraith, a simple silver circlet set with a single diamond. By speaking the name of his kingdom and defiantly claiming his rulership, Alith Anar can freeze time for the blink of an eye, giving himself a brief instant to slip away from harm, which is really cool. Like this moment where he just kind of stands toe to toe with something, pulls out this pulls out the Shadow Crown and basically declares himself, "I am Alith Anar, the Shadow King of Nagaraith," which freezes time for a second. Maybe time is like, "Oh, whoa, this guy's serious." But I'm not sure how they would factor this into Total War Warhammer, because it just gives the unit he's in swift stride. So maybe it's a small speed burst. Maybe it's something that's going to be akin to Skier Leap. I'm not sure how they're going to do Shadow Crown. If you guys have any ideas, do let me know. But I think the biggest thing of Alith Anar and what would make him very terrifying, is the Moon Bow. An exquisite weapon forged from a pale metal that glitters in the moonlight. The moon bow was handed to Alith Anar by the goddess Lilith herself. The merest whisper of its arrows strikes fear in the hearts of the treacherous Nagarathi. So, the first description of this in the book is The Moonbow is a bolt thrower. So that should be terrifying in and of itself. So basically, a Lithanar is a walking Eagleclaw bolt thrower. And he has the ability to either do multiple shots or one larger shot. But he is quick to fire, so he can shoot this thing quite quickly. Like without having to worry about much, because he can move this. You do this on the move. So if he is a roving Eagleclaw bolt thrower that confers a negative leadership penalty to Dark Elves, I don't know if they would do it Dark Elf specific, but maybe just to leadership as a whole, that'd be pretty terrifying. And if the Stone of Midnight gave him stock, or he already had stock included in his persona, he would be that'd be terrifying. I don't even know how I would factor that. Like, my back line would just be compromised so quickly by a stocked Lithanar lining up and just shooting multiple shots down the back line of my army. So I think that a Lithanar is a really cool way to get a lot of different utility out of a Lord that I don't think is too common in Total War Warhammer. We don't see a Lord quite like a Lithanar that is, you know, stock-centric, that is a ranged Lord, specifically a ranged Lord in that sense, because I feel like the ranged Lords are very lackluster. The Wood Elf one, the Wood Elf ranged variant is pretty good, but it's because it's got its ability to lock things down. So I feel like a Lithanar would be a pretty cool way to challenge that. And I think with Total War Warhammer 2, we're going to see a lot of Lords with stock. I think that a Lithanar would come as maybe an Assassin Pack DLC, including a Lithanar, including Deathmaster Snikch, the Eshin Clan Assassin, Master Assassin, and Deathblade, or Shadowblade, Deathblade. I can't name his name right now. The Lord we've talked about for the Dark Elves that does that is an assassin. So if they all came in one pack together, they all had stock, it would be kind of a scary thing, because the game becomes a little bit less straightforward. You know, you're always kind of looking out, okay, where is a Lithanar going to pop up and destroy my backline, or where is Snikch going to pop up and murder my Lord? So I think a Lithanar and all those stock Lords for in general would really add a lot of character and a lot of spice to the Warhammer world, and kind of, or at least Total War, at least kind of break down some of the direct outright barriers, or not barrier, but at least direct outright style of play that we see right now. The next lady I want to actually save for last is Alarielle, but I want to jump into these other two more hero level Lords, because I think they're pretty cool before we jump into the Everqueen last. She's going to be a little bit bigger of an entry here, but let's just jump on into Corhill. He is the captain of the White Lions, and I love Corhill. He's probably one of my favorite characters as well, probably because I really like White Lions. But let's jump into, again, Corhill, the captain of the White Lions. When the captain of the White Lions met his death at the hands of the Dark Elf assassin Urien Poisonblade, the bodyguard of the Phoenix King gathered to select a new leader from amongst their ranks. Their choice, approved and blessed by the Phoenix King, was the warrior Corhill. Corhill was a famous warrior even before his rise to captain. Years before, it had been he who had hunted and slain the great lion Tyrannus. This was a particularly ferocious creature, mutated by the warping power of chaos to an armor-hided brute that was mighty even by the standards of other white lions. Dozens of Thracian hunters had tried to bring Tyrannus down, but the beast had slain them all. Young Corhill, however, was not to be deterred, and he headed into the Thracian uplands in search of his prey. Tyrannus' trail was not hard to follow, for it was marked with the bloody bodies of those who had attempted to end his rampage. When Corhill finally encountered Tyrannus, the lion was near mad with bloodlust, and savage beyond belief. Yet, Kurnos was with the young hunter that day. Soon realizing his axe blows had no effect on Tyrannus' magical hide, Corhill shifted tactics. In a feat of physical strength unheard of for an elf, he wrestled the raging beast to the ground and throttled the life from its thrashing body. Corhill's success earned him an instant invitation to join the Phoenix King's White Lion bodyguard. Only twice before had such an offer been made to so young a warrior, and Corhill was swift to accept. In the decades that followed, the young hunter grew into a grizzled White Lion veteran, proving his worth time and again against Dark Elf assassins and the dreaded beasts of the Anuli Mountains. Thus has Corhill served Finubar the Seafarer with unfailing loyalty for many years, and has stood steadfastly beside him at many battles. Indeed, Corhill's gemstone set belt was a gift from Finubar following the Battle of Tor Acre, where Corhill hurled himself in the path of Morek the Black's Manticore. Corhill was badly mauled, but gave far better than he got, disemboweling the beast with a single swing of his axe before unconsciousness took him. The White Lions claim Corhill to be the mightiest elf in all of Ulthuan, and certainly his strength and stature is legendary. Yet Corhill is no lumbering giant, for he wields his long axe with a dexterity and grace that makes even his fellow White Lions appear cumbersome. His honest demeanor and noble bearing have won him many friends amongst the lords of Ulthuan, and the heroes of other races besides. Corhill has ever repaid their friendship with the same loyalty he offers his liege, and gladly marches to his allies' aid should the Phoenix King consent to sparing his services. Thus has Corhill's axe spilt blood in many lands, and is the cause of many peoples on his own. So, Corhill is obviously a special character White Lion. And so you can imagine what that's going to be like, you know, your AP kind of characteristic of the White Lion coming in through Corhill here. He actually wields Chial. It's the captain of the White Lions, has carried his keen-edged and finely balanced blade since the regiment's founding. Corhill is but most of the recent and long-honored line. So this actual axe, it would infer the Killing Blow special rule onto him, and as well as increases his strength. That's how it happens in tabletop. But we have seen the Killing Blow being allocated across two characters in the Total War Warhammer world in a different way. We've seen it as an anti-infantry mechanic. That's what it's like for the Grave Guard. The Grave Guard have AP and anti-infantry. So maybe this will give Corhill an anti-infantry mechanic as he's swinging two axes around, because that's what's happening here. He's swinging Chial and another hand axe all over the place. So maybe he is going to be this AP anti-infantry captain of the White Lions powerhouse, just chopping up Skaven left and right, beheading dark elves at every turn, and soon to be greenskins. But maybe not the lizardmen as much, because they have, you know, scales and weird eyes and like slithery tongues and oh god, my body. But then he's also got this Pelt of Tyrannus. So in return for Corhill's loyal service, Finubar directed that the pelt of the Great Lion of Trace be fashioned into a magnificent enchanted cloak. So this cloak is basically what it does for him is makes it so his armor's a little bit better, but the biggest thing here is it would probably confer a silver shield defense against ranged, as well as nulling the effects of poison. Because in the book it says, like, you know, he has a chance to poison doesn't automatically wound him. So rather than doing kind of the split mechanic of that, I could see them actually just making it so that it just poisons can't affect Corhill, which would be pretty crazy, because we have a lot of poisons on the battlefield right now, right? Especially with the witch elves and theirs that causes rampage. So if you had Corhill up against a unit of witch elves, he wouldn't just immediately rampage out of control, which would be pretty huge with an anti-infantry AP powerhouse like Corhill. So I'd be really interested to see him as just kind of like maybe a direct competition for a Queek. You know, you could put Corhill against Queek, and they're both not going to be, well, Corhill's not necessarily looked at as, hey, he's the most tanky of lords, but he's definitely going to be a little bit more of a duelist, a little bit more of a direct damage dealer, more glass cannon-y, I guess you could suppose. But it'd be great to see him, because Corhill is, I see as really being a easy addition to the game. There's not a lot to do here, and there actually is a lord in the campaign that you can buy through influence that is almost like a Corhill. From what I understand, he was actually included in the game as part of a Make-A-Wish thing, a special wish from Creative Assembly. They dropped him in. They said, hey, here you go. And I've not gotten a chance to use him, but I've heard he's quite good. So I wouldn't be surprised if they just straight up made that Corhill's replacement and put him into the game, or into the multiplayer portion of the game. I'd really love to see that. I think it'd be really kind of cool from both a Warhammer lore perspective, but more importantly from just like a really cool like humanitarian perspective. That'd be pretty awesome. But that concludes the captain of the White Lions, Corhill. Moving actually into another captain, we have Craig. Moving into another captain, we actually have Caradrian, the captain of the Phoenix Guard. Caradrian was an arrogant lordling in his youth, handsome, rich, powerful, and conceited. He was the very archetype of the jaded high elf aristocrat. There was no rumor he would not foster, no intrigue to which he would not stoop. By all accounts, his petty nature was such that even his family would have long ago cast him out, were it not for the fact that such an act would have been a break with all tradition. Caradhrian's life changed when he made a pilgrimage to the Shrine of Assyrian, a journey which all high elf nobles are expected to undertake at least once. There, in perhaps the worst display of arrogance in his life, Caradhrian stole into the holy chamber of days. What he witnessed there, no one knows. But when he emerged, he was a changed man. On his forehead was the glowing rune of Assyrian, marking him as a servant of the Creator God. On that day, Caradhrian gave up all his worldly possessions and took the vows of the Phoenix Guard. He has not uttered a word ever since. Caradhrian spends long days in secluded meditation, reading the fiery letters that tell of the past, the present, and the future. At other times, he stands atop the walls of the shrine, his keen gaze scouring the lands of Ulthuan. Indeed, it is said that to no other event is so small as to evade Caradhrian's gaze, and no sound small enough to escape his hearing. Some have accused him of harnessing the prophecies of Assyrian in order to influence the future, a transgression against the Creator God ranked amongst the highest of blasphemies. However, the truth of the matter is that Caradhrian simply notices things that others do not, and has no prattling tongue to distract him from the matters of greater import. Over his long years of study and contemplation, Caradhrian has become ever closer to the thoughts of Assyrian, until finally the hand of the Creator marked him as the captain of the Phoenix Guard. Now, he leads the devoted guardians of Assyrian during times of peace and war. There is divine strength in his hand, and the wisdom of Assyrian sits upon his noble brow. Caradhrian normally fights at the head of the Phoenix Guard, as befits his rank, but sometimes conducts a battle from the back of Ashtari, oldest and wisest of the Phoenixes of the Flamespire. Theirs is a bond that goes back centuries to Caradhrian's earliest days of service. At the Battle of Finival Plain, Ashtari picked an unequal fight with the Black Dragon Corsair, and it was only Caradhrian's intervention that rescued the Phoenix from a grisly fate. Since those days, both Ashtari's flames and the impetuousness have faded to naught, but his loyalty to Caradhrian burns as brightly as ever. So we have clearly a Phoenix Guard themed special character here, and one of a really good competitive pick if they were to add it to Total Warhammer 2, because if he was riding a Frostheart Phoenix, he would be an absolute monster. I mean, as it is right now, whenever I choose the High Elves in competitive quick battle play, I always take 2 Phoenixes. In the builds that I don't, I kind of look at those experimental fun builds like, whatever. But, like, the Flamespire Phoenixes, both of them are just rad. The Frostheart Phoenix, which Ashtari is a Frostheart Phoenix, is huge because they have that aura that basically slows people's attacks down. They do AP damage. Their magic resistance is higher as a result of the Winds of Magic, so they're really, really beastly beasts. they're monsters that really kind of hold their own. Like, I've had them, like, I threw both my Phoenixes against Malekith, and I mean, the Flamespire one kind of, you know, kind of floundered out all over the place, but the Frostheart Phoenix, that's the second fart noise I've made today. But the Frostheart Phoenix kind of held its own and stood there for a long time. So I'd love to see Caradhrian on one of these things with all of his special rules, because it's interesting because he's got this one rule called Mark of Assyrian, which means that when he dies, things that kill him get damage. So whether that means he explodes or how that really factors into the game, because I would love to see a special character, especially the High Elves, who are all haughty and nice and proper and prim. As soon as one of their lords gets killed, just fucking explodes everywhere, pointed head and fly into the damn sun. But that's something I would really love to see, as far as how they would incorporate that into the game. His other special rule is the Phoenix Blade. This ancient flame-breathed blade was enchanted for Cor Balon, the first captain of the Phoenix Guard. So basically what this is, it gives him flaming attacks. So basically picture this Phoenix Guard, which are already imposing as it is. They already have their wards, say, their high armor on top of a high armor AP slowing melee attack, melee resistance beast with a flaming attack, and its thing, the beast itself is on snow, on ice, is wreathed in ice. That's what I'm gonna go with. Yeah, it's not on snow. Snow's on a drug. Well, if you're in California, it is, but which I am. So I really like Caradrian as far as what he would mean from a competitive choice or competitive pick in the multiplayer world. I don't know if they would make him to drop him into campaign, because where would he start? The Shrine of Assyrian? And I mean, he's not geared towards capturing a bunch of land, so I don't know how they would do this. Like, maybe he would be an influence choosable hero for the High Elves. I'm not sure how they would incorporate it to a campaign perspective, and it's very rare do they choose to make a legendary lore that can't also play in campaign. So I don't know how or if they would include Caradrian, because maybe putting this guy on a Phoenix is just too much, because the Phoenixes themselves do so much outside as just a Phoenix. I mean, while as the dragons also do quite a bit, there's a lot of utility around the Phoenix units themselves. Like the Flamespire Phoenix can explode and come right back to life. So there's a lot going on than just simply scaly skin, causing terror, breath attacks, big ass creature. So I'm not sure how they would incorporate Caradrian if they did at all. But we're gonna round things up here with our very last lord, or should I say lady, Alarielle the Radiant, Everqueen of Ulthuan. And this one's a bit of a doozy here, so hang tight. She's 2 pages of lore and special rules, so we've gotta save the biggest and best for last, right? Alarielle the Radiant, Everqueen of Ulthuan. Since the Golden Age, the Everqueen has served as Aisha's chosen priestess in the mortal world. Whilst the tradition of the Phoenix King is relatively new, a mere 6,500 years in age, there has always been an Everqueen. Alarielle is the 11th Everqueen to rule since the time of Anarion. Her flowing hair is like a golden cloud, and it is said that so great and so timeless is her beauty that it can move even the immortal gods to tears. The Everqueen's power is that of nature itself. Where Alarielle walks, the fields start to blossom and flowers spring forth from the ground. When she is joyful, the sky is clear and the land for leagues around blooms with life and light. When she mourns, the skies weep with her, and when her eyes darken with rage, thunder roars across the hills. As a servant of light and nature, the Everqueen is opposed to corruption in all its forms. Thus does she remain above the petty intrigues of her own court. Not even the most devious heart can conceal untruth from her pure, unflinching gaze. More importantly, her presence is anathema to tainted creatures of all kinds. She can banish demons with a single touch and unravel the dark bindings of the undead with but a gesture. All the benevolent gifts of Aisha are hers to wield. No wound is beyond her skill to mend, and there is no shadow upon the heart that she cannot banish. Alas, Alarielle's powers recede as the dark tide of chaos grows stronger, and the mortal world cries out in torment. When the power of chaos is at its peak, even her mortal frame grows weak, the brilliant gold of her hair fading almost to pure white, her limbs growing enervated and brittle. At such times, the elven race stands upon the brink of extinction. Should the Everqueen perish, her people would surely pass into the darkness soon after. The Everqueen does not fight in a conventional manner, and eschews weapons of all kinds, but she is no less dangerous for it. Her touch, so soothing to the pure-hearted, is anathema to those with even a taint of corruption in their hearts. The victim might not feel anything at first, but as the magic of her touch travels through his body, it grows more powerful, feeding off every black desire and cruel purpose. Moments later, the foe is naught but a cleansed and withered corpse, his evil forever purged by Aisha's light. Moreover, Alarielle wields the winds of light and life with all the skill of Sapphire's most learned high mages, and can call forth great storms of cleansing energy to sweep the agents of chaos from her hallowed presence. Whilst most of her predecessors deliberately stayed at a distance from war as circumstances would allow, Alarielle has made a point of leading armies in Ulthuan's defense. At the start of her reign, she had little choice, for Avalorn was overrun by Dark Elves and worshippers of chaos. With her nation overwhelmed and the Phoenix King under siege in Lothern, it fell to Alarielle to rally the High Elves to Ulthuan's defense upon the Finneval Plain. Since then, Alarielle has commanded many armies in the Phoenix King's stead, whilst Finubar remains ensconced in the highest towers of Lothern, pursuing an agenda hidden from all but his closest allies. Not whilst she still draws breath will Alarielle allow Avalorn's beauty to be despoiled by war, a determination that many beings of tainted heart have encountered to their ruin. So it is that a High Elf army might find glorious aid in its darkest hours. As dawn breaks, one of the Everqueen's handmaidens sounds the horn of Aisha, so that the goddess might notice her high priestess upon the field of battle. Then the banner of Avalorn is raised high, its living threads shimmering in the sunshine. As word spreads of Alarielle's arrival, despair vanishes like shadows in daylight, and a newfound resolve arises to take its place. Then the horn of Aisha sounds once more, spurring the assembled elves onward into deeds of legend. Despite Alarielle's many victories in the years since the Battle of Vinaval Plain, many elves are secretly appalled by her actions. Tradition dictates that the Everqueen sees to the spiritual defense and well-being of the elves, leaving the Phoenix King to prosecute wars of blood and fire, and the High Elves value tradition above almost all. Others see this as a sign that Aisha herself has become more warlike in these desperate times, that the misery and destruction of the mortal world has roused even the gods to battle. But you see here, she's a pretty pivotal character in the lore of not just the current High Elves, but the High Elves as a whole. I mean, the Everqueen is even more important to the Everqueen spiritually and, you know, in actuality to them, you know, on a political basis. So, in tabletop, Alarielle is a level 4 wizard, which is, again, just a lore level wizard for Total War Warhammer terms, that can use Lore of Life, Light, and High Magic. Now, we've seen a lot of these lords kind of come into play here. Like we see a Teclis and we see a Mazdamundi who have access to every single lore. And they kind of gave them their own special smattering, their own lore, more or less. You know, they gave it like the lore of Teclis, which has like Shem's Burning Gaze, Net of Amontok, Chain Lightning, the other Heaven's ability that buffs you. They made basically their own lore for them. So they have their own special, like specific spells from the lores. So I don't know if they would do that with an Alarielle, you know, giving her Net of Amontok, Banishment, maybe even Apotheosis, Dwellers Below, and you know, what's another good one? Maybe Hand of Glory. That'd probably be a good one to fit her theme of buffing and inspiring the High Elves. But it's interesting how they did that with Total War Warhammer 2, because I think they wanted to try and reduce a lot of the confusion or a lot of the headache from, like, you look at a Manfred von Karstein and he has all these spells. He's got Death, Shadow, and Vampires. And to a newcomer, that's pretty intimidating. I'd be like, oh god, I never want to play this guy. He's bald. He looks like Pitbull, but dead. So I don't think I'd dabble that route. In fact, I didn't touch Manfred von Karstein for, like, ever. So Alarielle, though, I'm not sure if they would do the kind of same treatment they've done for everything else. But you see here, she's very Aisha-themed. She's very much like Orion we've already seen with the Cloak of Aisha. So with the Horn of Aisha, which is an heirloom magic item we'll get to here soon, she herself has some abilities where she would kind of fall into, what's her name? The lady for the Bretonnians. So she's got the Boon of Aisha, which makes it so that all units that are around her, well, all units attached to her in specific in the tabletop, I would say as an aura around her, have magic attacks. In addition, they're immune to fear and terror. So I would love to see that incorporated right into the game, just like we see with the lady for the Bretonnia. It would just be kind of almost the same exact thing, but just for High Elves. She does have a Chaos Bane ability that makes it so that any demons around here suffer damage, but we don't have any demonic things in the game yet. Maybe we'll see that in the third one, or we'll see it added slowly. I mean, the only things that we see as demons are Big Bird for the most part. So I'm not sure how, or Chaos Spawns, as you could say, are demonic, and some of the other things here and there, but not enough stuff that special rule would make a really good translation into this game. Alarielle was a really competitive pick in tabletop because the demons, Chaos Demons, were god tier. Everyone in a competitive circuit there was like 1 or 2 armies of them always floating around just stomping the land. And if you chose Alarielle with the Banner of the World Dragon in tabletop, you just had a chance to pretty much squash the demons outright. So the Chaos Bane special rule I don't really see coming into play just yet. But she has this Touch of the Everqueen that gives her the Heroic Killing Blow special rule. So I'm not sure if we would actually see her with a Heroic Killing Blow, knowing that she's not meant to really be in combat. A lot of her stuff isn't geared towards her fighting, it's more towards people around her fighting. So I'm not sure if we'll give that to her, if they will give that to her, because it's only directed towards people with Forces of Chaos. So her special items here, her magic items, are pretty lore heavy too, so let's get into those too. The Shield Stone of Aisha. The Shield Stone is as old as Ulthuan itself and pulses with inner energies. Only the Everqueen can release the power it contains to ward away harm from the pure-hearted, deflecting mortal blows and dashing arrows to the floor. So this basically just gives ward save. No, this huge sweeping description of you get a ward save. So Alarielle, from a campaign perspective, maybe she starts in an Averlorn. That would make a lot of sense. And we actually didn't talk about like where Alithanar would start, because I want to kind of get into this. So if we have Tyrion starting in Lothern and Eataine, it would make a lot of sense for Alarielle to start in Averlorn, but it also would make a lot of sense if we had like a Nagarath where Alithanar starts, because we don't have a northern starting point for the elves, and that's where a lot of hell's breaking loose up there, right? You've got the Cult of Cain is up there going wild. You've got one of the expansionists, Tyrannok probably is probably going to be aggressive towards you, and you've already got the barbarians to deal with. So I think like an Alithanar starting a Nagarath, which also has to deal with Dark Elves, would be a really, really cool, really hard special campaign to start, with Alarielle being even a slightly reduced difficulty to that. But we'll move on here to the Star of Averlorn. About her noble brow, the Everqueen wears a diadem of Ithelmar, in which is set a single radiant gem, given by Anarian in Trist of Astariel. This is no ordinary gem, but is said to be a star taken from the heavens by Aisha and bound within a magic crystal, and holds the power to heal mortal wounds. So basically, Star of Averlorn would almost be like a bound magical spell, like Teclis has Fireball as a bound magical item. This would basically be either like an Apotheosis, an Earthblood, some sort of healing spell, because that's exactly what it is in the game. It just gives a quick little heal to a special character. So, well, it's for a single friendly character within 12 inches. So what I would see that is, it's a bound spell, healing like a massive or a minor healing ability, only targetable though on characters and lords, or heroes and lords. That's the way I could see that transiting out, which would be really cool, I think. Then we've got the Stave of Averlorn. The Stave of Averlorn is a symbol of Alarielle's rule over the land of Averlorn. It is an ancient heirloom which is passed from one Everqueen to the next, and it has been since before the time of the Phoenix King. It enables Alarielle to gather the magic that flows through the land and direct it as she wishes. So basically, this allows her to recast an ability that was already cast. So I'm not sure if we'll see that. That seems very strong. It depends on the spells that they would give her. But if we're thinking of it from a multiplayer standpoint, okay, your army's really kind of up against the ropes here. You've got 2 units of Phoenix Guard that are really beat down. They really needed some extra aid. Boom, I'll pop Apotheosis on one of them. Okay, boom, I'll pop Stave of Averlorn and pop it again on another one. That'd be a really cool mechanic. From a multiplayer standpoint, holy crap, would that be just kind of... would be strong, again, depending on the abilities they gave her. Like, if they gave her any, like, a double net of Amantag, you could just net a whole front line. Like, holy crap. You'd stop the enemy dead in its tracks. Oh! Or if maybe it has, like, some sort of recast on it, where if you cast a spell, you cannot press the ability for, like, maybe 10 seconds. So you can't just stack 2 things. Like, I know she wouldn't have this ability, but double stacking Soul Leech would be pretty brutal, I think. So, I'd love to see that put into the game in some way or another. Maybe it would just be a quick surge of because they already kind of have something like that for the mages. They can have a quick, either they can choose to regenerate the Winds of Magic faster, or they can do a quick shot to the Winds of Magic. Maybe that would do this. It would just be a larger boost of Winds of Magic, so you could cast any other spell again quickly. But I'd love to kind of see that, and that way it wouldn't damn the recycle of a spell, because if you're casting Apotheosis back to back, it has to have a recycle, or else it kind of unbalances itself, right? So with Alarielle, we've got 2 items: the Horn of Aisha and the Banner of Averlorn. These are items that the army can choose, not so much just her. So I'm going to read them just because they fit into her profile, and I don't really know how they'd be applied to the game, because they're attached to her, but we'll see. We'll read these nonetheless. The Horn of Aisha is fashioned from a single pearl white seashell. Its creation remains a mystery to all the scholars and mages of Ulthuan, but it is known that the Horn of Aisha has existed for as long as there have been Everqueens. When it is winded, that's a weird thing to say, the call or this beautiful instrument can split the veil between the mortal and immortal realms, rousing the mother goddesses to grant a blessing upon her favorite children. So, basically, it just makes it so anything that's kind of affected by the Horn of Aisha would have a better melee or ranged attack. If I'm translating it to Total War terms, it basically says units receive a +1 to hit bonus on all shooting and close combat attacks. +1 to hit would be the equivalent of melee attack for us in the Total War world. So Banner of Averlorn. Woven from living leaves and the hair of the Everqueen's handmaidens, the Banner of Averlorn is an artifact of unsurpassed purity. It is crafted anew when an Everqueen ascends to the throne and will one day serve as her funeral shroud. Whilst the Everqueen lives, the Banner of Averlorn is a beacon of light and life. Should she perish, the magic fades from the mortal world, spiraling into the realm beyond to shield the Everqueen from the thirsting attentions of Slaanesh. So, basically, spells from lore and light get a bonus being cast. So I'm not sure if this would infer a bonus to the actual casting abilities of Alarielle, or if something special would come of that. But I'd be really interested to see how that would translate into the game. But really, that's going to conclude things here today, guys. Hopefully you got a really good idea of how these legendary lords work. I really wanted to kind of go over their lore real quick, as well as their special abilities, because I think that we're going to be seeing these as some of the DLC lords for the High Elves. Maybe not all of them, but I think a good majority of them. We've seen a lot of good legendary lords added in Total War Warhammer 1, and they were kind of saying that, hey, you know, we'd like to add more legendary lords. I think it was like something up to 6 or something of that sort. You guys can correct me, obviously, on that, for every race. So that they're looking to jam-pack these races to the brim for starting locations and different ways to approach their armies. So I'm very interested to see what we get all said and done before Total War Warhammer 3 comes out. But hopefully we'll be seeing maybe the Sisters of Averlorn, the special units attached to Alarielle. I was thinking maybe those would be Regiments of Renown or High Elf Archers with light armor, but I don't think that's actually going to be the case. Now, the more I kind of think about it, maybe they'll actually be their own unit, kind of like a Sisters of the Thorn. But maybe we'll see handmaidens, some stuff of the other sorts. But thanks for watching here today, guys. Hopefully you got a lot of information. If there's other things you want to know about, please feel free to leave me a comment. Let me know. I'm always happy to provide more information for y'all. I'll be hopefully doing one of these for Lizardmen too. That's the only race of the 4 that I haven't done yet. So we'll get some Lizardmen stuff up. I do want to do a video on some of the High Elf legendary buildings that we see in the campaign. Warrior 695, I think it was so kind to post onto the subreddit, and I'll actually cite him properly in the video. All of the legendary locations, or sorry, the unique building locations for the High Elves, and did one for the Dark Elves, so I want to do a video on that, so those of you wondering what those are and the lore behind them, we can get that all kind of sussed out for you. But thanks for watching here today, guys. Have a good one. Be on the lookout for the head-to-head campaign coming out from Turn and I. Let me know if you want to see anything, and take care. Bye. So there's something that we haven't talked about much that's coming this year, and that's the Regiments of Renown. Now, we know that we're getting these as it's been told to us, and it's also pretty obvious. And we already have them for the first game, and well, we lost the 30th anniversary ones, but by God, if we're not getting them back. So, in a 4-part video, maybe, I don't know, you guys let me know, but I want to discuss each race's possible Regiments of Renown: High Elves, Dark Elves, Lizardmen, and Skaven. After the Tomb Kings come out and we see which legendary legions they get, we'll do one for them. Now, here's how I'm going to do this. Rather than conveying every possible Regiment of Renown per unit, I'm going to suggest what one I either like the most or makes the most sense. For example, there's like 10 other famous quote-unquote knights when it comes to Silver Helms, but obviously we'll probably only get 1, if not 2. So let's get started though, as the High Elves have plenty to go through. Now this is an interesting one because there are so many options here. The High Elf Heraldry book that came out to showcase the different color schemes of the various realms shows a few Regiments of Renown in the back, namely the Revenants of Cain, and they are a spearman unit. So the Revenants of Cain are, just to backtrack there would be what I would suggest would be the Regiments of Renown spearmen. The Revenants of Cain are pretty interesting because they're depicted as using swords and shields, and this is clearly out of the norm for spearmen as well. You know, they're spearmen. One thing that the High Elf have always really needed, especially in the tabletop, has been a swordsman unit. Their Dark Kin received their bleak swords, and it really worked out well for them. The Dark Elves were, at the end of 8th edition, ranked above the High Elves, but of course the demons way up there, but whatever. they have this really kind of brutal history too. So as some of the last loyal elves from Naggarith, they help to protect the Blighted Isle from the Dark Elves. Now the Blighted Isle is home to the Shrine of Cain, which is what these warriors worship, and that's something we know is very frowned upon by the rest of their kin. So they actually play this huge part in the end times, as they're in a number of battles, you know, the defense of the Eternal Glade and the Battle of the Blighted Isles. In fact, in the end times, there's this whole big portion of the history they talk about, hey, well, Malekith's coming, and all of these remnants of Cain, because they are more or less militia, but they are militia on the Blighted Isle, come out from hiding to fight against Malekith. And in the defense of the Eternal Glade, it's interesting, they actually have now begrudgingly rallied to fight alongside him. So it's a very interesting dichotomy. The end times is kind of like a yakety sax playing crazy time of weird alliances and allegiances. But the Revenants of Cain I could see as maybe this frenzied sword infantry unit with their shields giving them some range defense. Now, definitely a bit more of a threat on the battlefield compared to your standard spearmen. Spearmen themselves have great staying power, but really not much killing. This would break that mold with an entry-level Regiments of Renown that can really crack open chaff that would otherwise require archery or the other more elite units to help clear out. And you can't have spearmen, though, without their trusty archer counterparts, the other arm of the High Elf Militia. So with archers, this is another entry straight from the heraldry book, but it's honestly one of my favorites just because of the lore attached to them, the Mist Walkers of Ibris. Again, there are plenty of other options for possible Regiments of Renown for the archer quote-unquote class or unit for High Elves, but this is the one that I at least like the most. Now, to go into a bit of background here, Ibris is, shrouded in all of these mystical and magical mists. Alliteration aside, these mists sometimes hide fell foes indeed, if not some sort of Norscan invader. And the Mistwalkers of Ibris range through Ibris, hunting demons within the mists and anyone that would invade the Grey Shores. Now, the big difference between the Mistwalkers and normal archers, aside from their proficiency in hunting demons, is that they're drawn from the nobility rather than the civilians. So you have all these remarkable princes and nobles that came up through the Mistwalkers. Eltharion the Grim, my favorite High Elf hero, was actually at one time a Mistwalker of Ibris. So you can see these archers are a bit more elite and regal than their conscripted peers, or I guess their militia peers. So the real question is, how would they translate to Total War Warhammer 2 without being just a budget Sisters of Avalorn? Now, until we get Sisters of Avalorn in the game, it's hard to really speculate on what is, 2 points of, speculation. So I'd say that the Mistwalkers of Ibris would have the ability to do magic damage with their bows, helping them hit ethereal and demonic targets. It's very lore-friendly for them. But maybe even an AP characteristic, as I want that so bad in the High Elf roster. And it'd be cool if they had maybe some attribute like immune to psychology to symbolize their otherwise steely resolve. But that might be pushing it for a range unit, so we'll see how that goes. But since we're doing the sort of entry-level units and we've covered both the infantry and the ranged, let's move over to our entry cav in the Illyrian Reavers. And you notice I say cav to prevent myself from saying cavalry or cavalry being the right way to say it. But we know that Illyrian Reavers come in 2 flavors, ranged and, not ranged. So the real question is, what are the Illyrian Reavers going to be? Now, before we really get into their stats, we can touch on some of the less fleshed out entries going forward. The other 2 have these pages, not multiple pages, but there's a whole block page dedicated to them with a nice little lore blurb. But the Heralds of the Wind hail from Illyrian, as the rest of their kind do, but the lore has that they are a very fast and timely quick attack unit, so they're kind of always appearing exactly where they need to be at the most opportune moment. Now, going back to the flavor of the Reavers, how could we see this playing out? Well, let's say that they're a melee variant. I could see them being a lot tougher than normal Reavers. If we look at things like the Norscan Regiments of Renown, we see the Ice Wolves as having a lot more staying power. The Regiments of Renown Ice Wolves go from being just a fast attack skirmishing unit to one that can actually trade almost evenly with Knights of the Realm. So that's what I think we'd be looking at a much faster, much stockier version of the melee Reavers. Now, if we're talking ranged, I think that they'll just have
an increased firing rate or maybe a slightly increased weapon damage on their range. I don't think they'll have anything crazy like special shots or anything of the sort, really. Illyrian Reavers don't necessarily roll that way, but you know, it's kind of a who's who of what they do. They typically kind of choose things that are way out of the norm or things that we didn't expect. And it's really cool when they do that. I mean, obviously it's badass, and you know, get these really cool Regiments of Renown that have all these kind of cool skins, custom skins or flavors. And I mean, I never see them coming. I'm like, oh yeah, cool choice, CA, like that one. But as we round off the entry-level units and start to get into the higher tiers, we can't leave one of my favorite units behind, Lothern Seaguard. Now, we're starting to run out of the units from the Heraldry book, and as a result, we're going to have to get into some of the units that were introduced in the end times. The unfortunate thing is that they might be totally missed out on since the timeline hasn't included them yet. The nice thing about elves, though, is that they're really old, so there's no telling if they're just add these units in as a nod as how they've been around for damn near forever, in Warhammer time at least. So the Storm Riders are a unit of Lothern Seaguard that hail from Lothern, but are known for their dangerous boarding actions and these kind of legendary patrols of the seas around Ulthuan. And the Storm Riders' shields have really slotted in later editions as the go-to shield of the Lothern Seaguard. They've got this giant on the front, and it's this giant worm. And it's Aminar, and he is the great worm that sleeps deep under the Emerald Gate of Lothern, protecting the entrance to the city. He's a mare worm, this is what it's called. But since the Lothern Seaguard are such a strong unit on their own, it's hard to say how they're going to work as a Regiment of Renown. Maybe since they're famed for fighting in ship-to-ship engagements, they'll have two weapons rather than a spear, giving them an anti-infantry characteristic, as they're used to kind of squaring off against their favored foe, the Blackguard Corsairs. But what would be interesting is if they maybe even had longbows, so even more range. You could maybe even argue for a Sundering armor, but I really worry about how strong that would be. You know, granted it's just a single unit, so it can't be that OP, right? I mean, the Rusty R's are completely useless, huh? Ugh. Either way, we'll skip on over to a unit that really needs some love, in my opinion. The Silverhelms, and they are in a really weird spot in the meta. They go from no one using them to them having a ton of viable builds to not. It's very weird, but I really love them. I mean, my army in tabletop consisted of one big unit of Silverhelms that, with my lord in it, all decked out to the nines. It was my favorite block of my high elf army. But there are a lot of specialty Silverhelm units, all of them knights hailing from different parts of Ulthuan. So I went with the Knights of Tor Aelin, as they play a special part in Tyrion's history. Tor Aelin is in the far northeastern region of Kothic, where Tyrion personally trained. And Tyrion actually was born and raised, well, kind of born and raised, but he came up in Kothic. And he trained personally with the knights. He trained them himself, and he also trained in them. In addition, he actually came up through the Knightly Order, so he learned greatly. But also, he saved the entire Brotherhood from this dramatic Corsair attack under Drain Brackblood, which is the least Dark Elf name I could think of. But the stats on the Silverhelms are pretty considerable when it comes to anti-infantry. But I'd love to see an AP characteristic slapped onto them with a real nifty paint job. I mean, flaming attacks would also be cool, but I'm not sure of any Silverhelm knightly brotherhoods that are known for striding through the forests, screaming with their lances on fire. No, like, pun intended on that, but I just don't see a ton of crazy stuff happening from a Silverhelms unit. Maybe something like the Lothern, not Lothern, but the forest. I can't, Averlorn Silverhelms or something like that, and maybe they've got some sort of benefit for fighting in trees, or I'm not sure. Like, it'd be great if they have like white lion Silverhelms. They're all lions. We'll get to that. Trust me, we'll get to that. But since we're on the subject of fire and lances, though, we'll jump over to another unit that's going to be totally in line with that. You guessed it, the Dragon Princes. So we can touch on my favorite cav unit in the entire game, really, with the Dragon Princes, or as a Regiment of Renown unit is called, the Fireborn. Now, back in the day, I think it was 4th edition to be exact, Dragon Princes used to not be colored blue and white. Instead, they were colored red and gold. And it's a very stark contrast to an army almost entirely covered in
blue and white. So I really miss those old colors. Even the dragon princes that hail from Caledor are not the blue and white we typically see, but actually a predominantly green color. So there are a lot of varieties for their armor. And the Fireborn were Prince Imrik's personal bodyguard. And we did talk about Prince Imrik here as the current Prince of Caledor, but really they're any ruling Prince of Caledor's personal bodyguard. And on their shield was the likeness of Andrognir, you know, the mighty dragon. We've talked about that. Anarian rode during the Great Catastrophe. You know, the badass dragon that single-handedly killed greater demons. Now, I want them to have flaming attacks. So that's what they're going to have. I mean, since this is a video about conjecture, I'm making the damn rules. And I always thought that them not having AP was really kind of weird, but maybe they'll have an anti-large characteristic or just a souped-up version of martial mastery that kind of imbues martial mastery in an aura around them. You know, we saw that with the Regiments of Renown Wood Elf Treekin giving an aura of fire resistance. So maybe we'll get some more aura-based Regiments of Renown here for the High Elves or any of the other New World, or you know, I guess New World factions that we see here. And since we're talking so heavily about Caledor and Imrik no less, I think that a really solid choice for the Regiments of Renown is a beast in that category. Now we could get into something that something like Arcane Phoenix, but that'll be down the road. That'll be down the road maybe. Who knows? Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Instead, we'll talk about Menaithnir, the mighty dragon of Prince Imrik of Caledor. Now, there's no lore of the two fighting separately, so they could just as well make up a different dragon, but since I like to deliver lore to y'all, we'll talk about this big badass. Now, we've talked briefly about dragons, but they're keenly intelligent and don't simply listen to their masters. You know, they more select their companions at their own will, and they kind of make a bonding and like almost like a brotherhood through that. And this is the case for Imrik and the mighty Menaithnir. Imrik was kind of doubled over, you know, getting shanked multiple times by Nagarothi raiding party when Menaithnir arose from his slumber, and he flew from the mountain that lay above the Amani foothills, and that's where Imrik was getting, you know, prison shanked 1, 2, 3, cell block C. And Menaithnir kind of swept up the entire raiding party in this giant torrent of flame. And from there, he saved Imrik's life by bringing him to Tor Kaleda, a keep within the region of Caledor. It's actually on the map, right, whenever you play Total War Warhammer 2. And there, the two cemented their bond with the first telling of Dragon on High Elf relationships. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. That didn't happen at all. But seriously, their bond was thick as blood ever since. In the tabletop, Menaithnir actually goes into a frenzy if Imrik is killed. So they're quite close. So I could look at Menaithnir as a possible Regiment of Renown, Moon Dragon, or Star Dragon. I think that would be pretty awesome. And with that being said, maybe we'd just see a frenzied dragon, maybe with some added benefit to maybe their attacks or melee. It's really hard to imagine how they would do this, as this would be the first dragon outside of the Norscan ice dragon to be a Regiment of Renown. And I'd love some sort of different breath attack, one that can maybe can be enabled on the ground and is a cone right in front, which would really be awesome. But you kind of have to balance it out with the dragons themselves already being so strong in the High Elf army, and people kind of cheesing right now, taking 2, 3 dragons in a build, and you're like, okay, well, how the hell am I going to kill this? Imagine 2 of those dragons being, you know, stock standard of definition. Then you got this Regiment of Renown Menaithnir coming in with frenzy, just ripping through your line. So I'm sorry for talking about such a horribly OP beast, but I think that it does have to happen one way or another. But let's change the subject here. Let's move to a unit that does not exist, but might even exist by the time this video comes out, but probably not, but maybe even so. I'm not really sure. Creative Assembly's released like 5 things in the past 4 hours. It's ridiculous. But Shadow Warriors are the much coveted skirmishers that the High Elves need and deserve. You know, your answer to Shades and their counterpart. These, you know, stalkers shall hunt all sorts of Dark Elves. Now, the Grey are one of the named Regiments of Renown from the Heraldry book, and their history isn't anything overly in-depth, but it's rather cool. You know, essentially, they are from an elf house of nobles that sided with Malekith during the Sundering. Then afterward, after the Great High Elf Dark Elf Civil War, they spent the entire 5 millennia after that point killing Dark Elves in droves to try and earn and redeem their Forsaken honor. So
you know, really just overall badasses here. And it's really hard to double speculate, but the Shadow Warriors aren't known for their great many poisons or their magical bows that twist around corners, but they are known for being able to pick out the weaknesses and points in armor that are the most vulnerable. So maybe a Sunder Armor characteristic here would be very, very threatening from a unit with stock. Think Rusty R's again, but not disgusting goblins. And I know we said Sunder Armor earlier, but with Norska coming back in May, I think we could stand to see more Sundering back in the game. You know, Famir, you're definitely missed. And with the amount of heavy armor and heavily armored units in this new expansion, sparing the Skaven, of course, it's not something that would be definitely missed, or I'm sorry, definitely too OP, because you need a lot of that for what we're dealing with any kind of high elf elite unit, any kind of dark elf, all the lizardmen, big dinosaurs. So there's plenty of chances where Sunder Armor can come into a somewhat of a balancing perspective. But enough of that sappy shit about the Famir. Let's jump to the Silver Pelts, a renowned regiment of White Lions. Now, we're really out of the famed Regiments of Renown that are in the current timeline, but that's okay. Like I said, the End Times gives us plenty of really rad, but ultimately throwaway regiments. I mean, they show them in one page, and the next page they kill them off. It's kind of a heartache. But the Silver Pelts are pretty amazing for that same reason. In the lore of the End Times, Trace gets burnt to a crisp by demons that invade, and the Silver Pelts are, at the time, had made a vow to defend the Eagle Gate or die trying. The governing prince gave them leave to go help their besieged homeland, as the Silver Pelts were renowned for their ability to hunt and kill demons. Being the badasses that they are, they refused, saying that to abandon their oath is to be more of a disgrace to their homeland than not going back. The rest of the time, they sang these kind of deep, growling songs of remembrance as they looked on toward their burning homeland. And I think of the dwarfs in the opening of The Hobbit, you know, that Misty Mountains Cold song. Like, that's exactly what I think of, but maybe not by dwarfs. So that leaves, what would these guys really have ability-wise? Well, if they're famed at hunting demons, then I'd say that they have an anti-large characteristic. A characteristic I would have thought that the vanilla White Lions would have had, to be honest, but that's neither here nor there. Then maybe magic attacks on top of that already devastating AP. So these guys are going to be like heavily armored slayers, hunting and hacking their way through large targets. Now, since we're talking about White Lions, I'm going to go out on a total limb here and say that the possible Regiment of Renown for the Ithilmar chariot is the White Lion chariot. Now, this is totally a stab in the dark. I just really want to talk about the White Lion chariot. I can't really think of a really good Ithilmar chariot Regiment of Renown. I just really like this chariot. It's the coolest damn thing. But this is the kind of mighty chariot from the region of Trace. You know, it's operated by White Lions and pulled by White Lions. And one is the animal, the other is the name of the unit. So don't think you've got a super intelligent lion driving our chariot. We'd be in a whole world of hurt if that were the case. But we cover the lore for them in their entry in our High Elf Army video, which will be linked at the end of this video as well. But what would these guys look like on paper? That's the real question, right? Well, I'm thinking about along the lines of a Gore-Beast chariot. In the tabletop, the White Lion chariot had more toughness, it hit harder, and overall was a much stronger chariot for the High Elves. It was able to take it was able to make much stronger charges. So I'd be looking at something with maybe an anti-large characteristic to play off of lions raking down huge beasts, or an AP falling in light with the chariot as a whole. But maybe even a high weapon strength or a charge bonus. It has to be slightly slower than an Ithilmar chariot, though, so you're not going to have this lion just charging through the battlefield all over the place. You're going to have to swap speed for outright killing power. But a worthy swap for most. Now, there are other things that they could be throwing on here. It'd be really cool if they had like a Caltrops ability where it could just drop something that slows something behind it. But maybe that's me just watching too many James Bond movies. But I don't know. I think it'd be really cool to have a little bit more flavor to this. But we've gone into the White Lions, but we might as well go into the other two elite units of the High Elves, and really the last two on this list for the most part. And the Swordmasters of Hoeth were a staple in my tabletop army of old. You know, dropping a Razor Standard and Occam's Mind Razor on them made for some glorious knife through butter scenarios when fighting against ogres. But what would a Regiments of Renown Swordmasters unit look like? Well, the Blades of Hoeth have the history have this history in the end times that's all wrapped up with the Dark Elves, actually. Their lore master, Karnath, fell to the temptations of Morathi and walked a path away from the shining light of Sapphire. And as we know, the Swordmasters are bound by duty to the Tower of Hoeth and their lore masters, so they willingly followed him down the steps of insanity. Now, how can we look at this from a stat standpoint? Maybe magical attacks, something where these fighters are steeped in a bit of the dark magic that their lore master has gotten into, or maybe just a bit of lore where their swords have magic from the Tower of Hoeth imbued into the blades. And that would be nifty. But you could even have something as simple as an increase in their range defense, as they are more elite and veteran soldiers, so maybe they're able to deflect arrows far better than their younger peers, and younger being an operative word here. You could even have something like another aura effect on them, which would be pretty fun. It's hard to really say how Swordmaster Regiments of Renown will be kitted out because they do their job already so well. But with all that being said, we should just move on to our Phoenix Guard and our last unit. And I unfortunately don't have any one remarkable unit of Phoenix Guard to go on. In the end times even, they've got like the Eternity Guard and they've got the Flaming Guard. The Flaming Guard are the Phoenix Guard and the Black Guard of Nagaron put together. The Eternity Guard are the Phoenix Guard, the Black Guard of Nagaron, and the Wildwood Rangers put together. It's really kind of a cool dynamic. It's really kind of cool too, like the names from the Eternity Guard, the Eternity King, he's the king of all of the elves. The Blackfire Guard, I think that's what it was actually called, is when it's Phoenix, the Phoenix Guard and the Black Guard of Nagaron. Just kind of a really cool naming mechanic behind them. But a purely speculative and made up one would maybe be Caradrian's Phoenix Guard. A unit that serves or served directly under Caradrian himself. He's the captain of the Phoenix Guard we've talked about. So they, being a more elite and even more blessed unit, maybe their ward save could be higher. Maybe their halberds are steeped in flames, able to deliver judgment to all manner of foes. It'd be interesting to see their fear kind of upped to terror as well, or maybe even an aura of leadership around them as the elves are inspired to fight harder, knowing that the Eye of Assyrian is upon them. So that's why I'm struggling so much with the Swordmasters and the Phoenix Guard, because they're already such strong, versatile units, especially the Phoenix Guard. I mean, they're like probably point for point the best just single unit of infantry in the game that can output tons of damage, take a considerable amount of damage, and has a ward save. Like, there's just so much value in the Phoenix Guard. I love them so much. Love them so much. But that really brings things to a close here today, guys. We've definitely left some units out, left some on the table, but I wanted to cover the ones that I think are either most likely or my favorites, as I've said. But you could even have Caradrian's Phoenix, like I was talking about, Ashtari as a possible Regiment of Renown Frostheart Phoenix. And there are all of the very, very old mid to late 80s Regiments of Renown elves as well. The the Lothern Elf City Guard, or Elwing's Cavalry. The former actually has the Proto-White Lions used as musicians. Like all the Lothern Elf City Guard musicians have the lion pelts on them. And the former, the Elwing's Cavalry, are the first real form of the Illyrian Reavers in the Elf Codex. And back then, they weren't High Elves, Dark Elves, and Wood Elves. They were just elves. They did add Bugmans into the game. We got Bugman's Rangers, but Bugman's Rangers had a bit of a meme side culture to him for years within the Warhammer world. So I'm trying not... We've already seen the Wood Elves of Orion, we've seen the Knights of Arigio, we've seen the Knights of the Cleansing Flame. So they definitely know about those units. They definitely have pulled from those units. But we'll kind of see what happens here with those Regiments of Renown coming out. I believe they're coming out at the end of this month, beginning of next month. But as we work on the other Regiments of Renown, you can expect units, like Mangle Manhyd's, Dark Elf Company, and a lot. So plenty more to come. So if you guys enjoyed this video in this format, please let me know in the comments section. We can do the other races that have yet to get their own Regiments of Renown for more speculative goodness. It's always fun to kind of see how right or just how completely wrong I am when the full release rolls out. So I'm more than happy to do these kind of purely speculative, just to have fun videos. But thanks for joining me here today, guys. Don't forget to like the video. Have a good one and take care. Since we've talked now so much about the greenskins and having their additional big, large centerpiece units, I think it's time to pivot onto the High Elves. Now this is again an extrapolation on some of the units that I brought up as speculation in my Eltharion and Grom the Paunch video that is going to be linked in the upper right corner right now. So we talked about the Rogue Idol of Gork, and we have talked about the Colossal Squig. Now, in my video, I discussed two big large centerpiece units for the High Elves, the Arcane Phoenix and the Merworm. Today, we're going to talk about that Arcane Phoenix. And, excuse me, allergies abundance all over the place. One thing that is pretty important to note about the Arcane Phoenix is how important Phoenixes are in general to the overall kind of lore and importance of High Elves society. In addition to that, this was one of the only models in Monstrous Arcana that actually didn't get its own set model. It was just expected she would take the Phoenix model from the High Elf kit, which was amazing, and just make it an Arcane Phoenix in some way, shape, or form. Now, we're gonna read this little lore blurb on the Arcane Phoenix, then we're gonna go into the stat card as we always do, and we're gonna talk about some of the different options and special rules for the Arcane Phoenix because there are quite a few. So let's go ahead and dive in here on the Arcane Phoenix. Arcane Phoenixes are majestic and fearsome creatures, with wingspans as great as any of the mighty war eagles of the High Elves. They are cloaked in blazing feathers that can turn the sharpest arrow, their true power bound to their nature as a creature of spirit and fire, for they are a living embodiment of the destructive and purging wind of Akshi. Flames dance across their pinions to sear their prey when they attack. A long pair of feathered tails leaving a spray of blazing sparks and embers in their wake as they swoop across the battlefield. It is this nimbus of flame that constantly surrounds the Arcane Phoenix and betrays its otherworldly heritage. Arcane Phoenixes are creatures of myth and legend, known to the ancient legends of men and elves alike, but it is to the High Elves of Ulthuan that had the greatest significance. In their lore, Arcane Phoenixes are the companions of Assyrian the Creator, harbingers of woe and bearers of hope in equal measure, drawn from Assyrian's side when the winds of magic howl through the world of mortals in mighty storms, and in distant mist-shrouded Ulthuan, the High Elves are forewarned of the coming of these magical tempests by the sudden manifestation of Arcane Phoenixes in the skies above their island home. To them, they are a disturbing omen, a symbol of destruction soon to come, as well as the hope of rebirth. Their arrival can only mean that strife will once again be visited upon them, but also that those that survive will be stronger than before. Wizards go to great lengths to bind Arcane Phoenixes when they appear, both to command their power as well as to keep their destructive wrath from the control of their enemies. So the lore on them is not as extensive as some of the other things we've gone into, but that's okay because their rules are very, very robust. Now, we did talk about this in that Grom the Paunch and Eltharion video, so I'll kind of bring up some of those points that we talked about before. And one of my overarching themes for that Arcane Phoenix is that it would have the durability of a Frostheart Phoenix with the bound abilities like a Flamespire Phoenix would have. And you have a number of options, Cleansing Flames, Omen of Hope, Omen of Sacrifice, and Blessings of Assyrian. And then you have a number of special rules as well. So let's take a look at these special rules here. So you have Flaming Attacks, Fly, Unstable, Ember Storm, which we're about to read, Plumage of Flames, which we're about to read, Fiery Birth, which you know, Unbreakable, and then Terror. So I think a lot of these kind of make a lot of sense for people. I think rather than flaming attacks, it would be both flaming and magic attacks. Arcane Phoenix kind of just says magic attacks to me. Maybe AP damage, I'm not really sure. And Ember Storm, the way I kind of translate this, I believe that it would be a bound wind style ability that kind of locks the Phoenix into a set movement, but drops Flamespire Phoenix bombs in a path. So rather than you having to click the button a bunch of times and saying, okay, blop, 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 as was covetedly known as pigeon poops all over the place, I think that this would just simply do a real quick wind attack. Kind of like how when we take a look at a Plague Furnace, how it can use Pestilent Breath directly in front of it. I would look at Ember Storm just like that. it's a wind spell that's bound to the very front of the model and has to be done only in the front of the model. So you have to line it up yourself, and then as soon as you've kind of set it, it'll pull axis off the front of the model, and then you can push whatever direction you want for the Ember Storm. But it would then be a wind attack of just direct bombing in that direction. That way it would kind of take away some of the micromanagement that you need for a Flamespire Phoenix, and it would be an overall high risk, high reward. So you're gonna force your Phoenix into a set path that will drop these bombs, and if it drops these bombs, great, it's going to do damage, but it's going to be at the other end of where it was. So maybe at that point, it'll be locked down by a Howling Warp Gale, it'll get focused by range fire, whatever it is, you're just getting your high risk, high reward with Ember Storm. Now, of course, it could also just be a bound ability, which is a Vortex ability, but I like my other idea. I think it's a little bit more fun and characteristic, yeah? But the other ability here is Plumage of Flames. And the way that I kind of see this working is, the way it works is all non-magical attacks suffer a -1 penalty to wound the Phoenix, and in addition, models that begin the close combat phase in base contact with the Phoenix take a single strength 4 flaming hit. And the models thusly also immune to flaming attacks. So my interpretation of this is, I think of it as an aura that reduces melee attack and increases missile defense. Maybe even doing like a Mortis Engine effect where it does do flaming damage to everyone around it. I think that would be very weird, not weird, but very cool. We get stuff like that when we look at the Flamespire and the Frostheart Phoenix, right? They get portions of their abilities that are bound off of, say, the Winds of Magic, right? So the Frostheart Phoenix is more durable when there's more Winds of Magic. Also, it has a chilling effect, so it reduces melee attack of things around it. So I think Plumage of Flames has to be that kind of dipping into both ends of the Frost and the Flamespire Phoenix, and giving you kind of that ultimate, quote-unquote, Phoenix in this one. So the other thing here are the options. Cleansing Flames, Omen of Hope, Omen of Sacrifice, and Blessings of Assyrian. So I have an interpretation for this, but I want to read real quick these options and what they do in tabletop, and then we can discuss how that would work in Total War Warhammer, or at least a really cool idea I have for it. So Cleansing Flames, the Phoenix's flames are deadliest when focused upon the enemies of its master, Assyrian. All attacks, including Ember Storm attacks against models with the demonic and undead rule, gain 1 strength and count as magical. Sorry, the copy I've got of Monstrous Arcanum is very blurry. And count as magical. So, okay. Nothing crazy here. But again, magic attacks, there's that kind of hinting on that. Omen of Hope. The mere sight of a phoenix lifts the spirits of the High Elves when destruction looms, I think that is. Deadliness looms, doubt looms, something looms. When included in a High Elf army, the Phoenix has the Hold Your Ground special rule normally applied to battle standard bearers. So that's your Omen of Hope. And if these don't make a lot of sense to you, don't worry about it. I'm going to put it into Total War Warhammer terms. I'm just trying to give you guys an idea of how this works already. Omen of Sacrifice. The Phoenix drives the otherwise stoic High Elves into a suicidal fury. All High Elf units within 10 inches of the Phoenix during the close combat phase gain the Frenzy special rule. Ooh. Blessings of Assyrian. The Phoenix bears with it the blessings of the most powerful of the elven gods, Assyrian the Creator. The Phoenix gains the Always Strike First special rule. So some of these things don't apply to Total War Warhammer, right? Or some of these things are too niche, right? Like Demon and Undead rule, getting +1 to attack against them. Okay. Always Strike First. Well, they don't have that anymore. Or we don't ever have that. Hold Your Ground, well, that's applied to generals only. So here's how I would kind of look at this. I would look at this as stacking buffs similar to how you have for the Black the Black Coach. And I think Cleansing Flames, the way it could simply be translated, is just simply an increase to weapon strength on the Arcane Phoenix. Omen of Hope would essentially grant the Arcane Phoenix Encourage, and this stacks up as it stays in combat, forcing the Arcane Phoenix to kind of stay in combat a little bit more, getting you better benefit out of Plumage of Flames. So I think that needs to kind of happen, is you use Phoenixes currently as almost like a hit and run type thing to focus down and goon down enemy lords. I think the Arcane Phoenix can be a little bit tankier, and Omen of Hope, giving that encourage to units around it, kind of helps you solidify that role. Sacrifice, Omen of Sacrifice, I think then grants either Frenzy to just the Phoenix or Frenzy to things around it. which might be very broken depending on how that works. Maybe it's a reduced form of Frenzy, or maybe since it is the tier 3 of the Frenzy, you know, it's got to stay in for so long. Tier 3 of this ability, in my mind, it's got to stay in for so long for it to trip off. Maybe that kind of balances it. And the last thing, Blessings of Assyrian, I would think just gives the Arcane Phoenix a ward save, an innate ward save, or maybe even just a physical resistance buff that it can then trip off. So those are some of the ways that I could see all 4 of these options being included in the Arcane Phoenix in a fun manner. I mean, this is me basically looking at the Black Coach rules from tabletop and saying, oh, that's what Creative Assembly did? They took all the options for the Black Coach and just made it a stacking buff the longer it stays in combat. So I think that that's kind of the cool way to do it. And the Arcane Phoenix can really be a lot of cool things. In tabletop, the Phoenixes were mounts, mainly the Frostheart Phoenix. Well, the Flamestar one was as well. For, say, stuff like the Anointed of Assyrian, or Caradrian, one of the named character Anointed of Assyrian. So maybe with the Anointed Phoenix, we get access to Caradrian or Anointed of Assyrian added into the game. And for all intents and purposes, guys, the Anointed of Assyrian is basically like a souped up leader of Phoenix Guard, just a very strong version, just to kind of put it in watered down terms other than going into it in depth. So maybe the Arcane Phoenix gives you a chance to have that as a mount, or I'm sorry, the Anointed Phoenix, the Anointed of Assyrian can have the Arcane Phoenix as a mount. Or it even says, wizards go to great length to bind Arcane Phoenixes. And I mentioned that in that video, we do need to see Archmages. They're the only missing Lord portion of the High Elves. So maybe this is an actual mount option for Archmages. That'd be very exciting and very different, because that way, you know, you're not just dealing with Ithilmar barbed horses and Great Eagles in the same way that you have for Alarielle. I think it kind of adds a little bit of flavor and spice to the Archmage class or slot that makes them a little bit more appealing than just say, okay, well, why would I want to choose an Archmage of life when I can just choose Alarielle and just have healing out the ass? So, oh, well, now I get an Arcane Phoenix with it? Well, maybe that's a little bit more worthwhile. So hopefully you enjoyed this little foray into the Arcane Phoenix. It's probably the one thing I've discussed so far I am potentially most excited for. I don't know if this is going to be included in the Grom the Paunch and Eltharion DLC. I think it, to be totally honest, I hate to say it, but I think it might be a little bit of a stretch. I think that there are other units in the High Elf roster that are better included in the game. White Lion Chariots for one. Even if they did the Sea Patrol for High Elves just to give them access to a base tier swordsman unit, it would be way more advantageous than an Arcane Phoenix ever could be, unfortunately. But I think the Arcane Phoenix adds so much flavor to what is necessarily not supposed to be a beast faction in the same way that the Dark Elves are, or the Chaos supposed to be, or Greenskins are, but like a majestic beast faction as far as these Great Eagles and these Griffins and these dragons, all these regal creatures. Again, we don't have Griffins in the game, and Eltharion would add Griffins. So maybe the Arcane Phoenix is that way to kind of dip into the dreaded flying circus of the High Elves that was so coveted in the tabletop. But as always, guys, thank you so much for watching here today. Again, let me know in the comment section below if there's any other cool units from the Monstrous Arcanum you'd like me to do. I'm thinking of a really cool video I'd like to do wherein I talk about the Chaos Dwarfs as a potential new quote-unquote beast faction. And when I say beast faction, just to kind of circle back on that real quick, I'm saying a faction that relies on large creatures and monsters as a huge portion of its staying power or its aggressive power. And you get that again with Greenskins, with Beastmen, with Dark Elves, with Chaos. Those were a lot of the big things behind them. Like Dark Elves and High Elves were very similar, but Dark Elves had a lot of big, scary, destructive beasts with tits and snakes for hair. But still, my point remains, I think the Chaos Dwarfs are going to be that for Warhammer 3. They're going to be a really cool beast faction, much in a different way than the Ogre Kingdoms have to be. Because you have Kadai Destroyers, you have Kadai Fireborn, you've got Bull Centaurs, you've got Bale Taurus, all these very awesome creatures for the Chaos Dwarfs. But again, I'm going off on a separate tangent. We'll talk about that in a different video. As always, guys, like I said, thank you so much for watching here today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, let me know in the comment section below some things you're excited about as far as Monstrous Arcanum units you want me to discuss. I'm happy to do so. But as always, have a good one and take care.
So we know that there is a new Legendary Lord eventually coming for the High Elves. What we don't know, though, is what Lord or even Lady that would be. Would it be Alariel? Would it be Eltharion? Would it be Alith Anar, which I think is one of the big frontrunners in a lot of people's mind right now, is Alith Anar would be coming as a free LC, and it would bring the Shadow Warriors hopefully with him, Alith Anar being the Shadow King of Nagarath. But there is one other option that is not talked about because he hasn't been in the High Elf book for 2 editions, and that is the Dragon Prince Imrik. Now, to talk about Imrik, we have to go back. We have to go back to the 6th edition of Warhammer. And this is a pretty tumultuous time in the Warhammer world because this is when we have a transition from the game being overly complex to overly simplified. Back then, you didn't have lore masters of Hoeth like you do in the 7th and 8th editions. What you can do is you can pick up a lore master honor on your lord, so your lord can become a caster. So in Total War Warhammer terms, that's like basically creating your noble in your capital city, then earning a trait that would make him give him the ability to use high magic, something like that. So turn him into effectively a hybrid lord, since Total War Warhammer doesn't recognize the mage level that it does in tabletop. But one thing that the High Elf army kind of lacks is a monstrous, a lord on a monstrous unit, a special character on a monstrous unit. We've got that in almost every other faction, or I mean, for the exception of dwarfs, of course, but something that can have them really contest a dragon or a griffin. Tyrion is very strong on his own right, don't get me wrong here. He can dumpster quite a few lords, but when it comes to him against Malekith, I'll take Malekith hands down. Or him against Leonker on his griffin, or you've got any number of the dragon lords. You've got a lot of lords that don't play too well with the High Elves. And the only 2 options you've got for legendary lords in the lore to add are Eltharion, because he is on a griffin himself. And I think, honestly, he would be a better contender than Imrik, and we're going to talk about that why in about 2 minutes here. Or, again, Dragon Prince Imrik. So, I mean, my typical kind of lord thing here, I'm going to read through the very quick little blurb from the 6th edition book. This is an old book, like the pages are starting to yellow into the actual page. That's how old you know it is. And then we're going to go into what his magic items are, the lore behind each one of these magic items. And if you've already played through the High Elf campaign of Total War Warhammer 2, you're going to start to recognize some of these magic items. So let's delve in on the Dragon Prince Imrik, Dragon Prince of Caledor. Caledor is now a silent realm. No longer do the skies ring to the cries of dragons and the roar of the fiery breath. No more do the caves rumble with their sounds, nor does the earth shake beneath their heavy tread. Instead, there is nothing but the hollow echo of the elves' footsteps in the ancient halls. Most noble of these princes of dragons is Imrik, last of the line of the Phoenix King of Caledor. It is he who remains one of the few that can wake the dragons in time of need, and then only a few. Gone are the days when his followers rode into battle atop mighty fire drakes. Now it is Imrik alone who fights in the traditional manner of his house. And fight he does, in the defense of his homeland and indeed of Ulthuan. Imrik is a stalwart bastion of strength. Together with Tyrion and Teclis, the descendants of the great house of Anarion, he stands as an unbreakable wall between the many foes of the High Elves and the mystical Isle of Ulthuan. Imrik is the last of the line of Caledor, mightiest of the dragon princes. So, he has a little bit of a resurgence in the end times, actually, where we lose him, you know, where we lose all the cool lords. But, as you can see here, this is also a time in the Warhammer timeline where dragons are in aplenty. From what you know, from what you guys have heard from me talking about the time of Anarion, where all of the dragon princes of Caledor were on literal dragons, and not the figurative mounts that they've created that look somewhat dragon-like. They no longer is this a thing. And not now, of course, like we just said, the dragon princes are on horses, no longer on these mighty beasts. But Imrik, in the lore, there's other portions of this book that talk about how he knows the songs of the dragons. They weave these elaborate songs and dances and kind of weird shit to wake dragons from the caves all throughout Caledor. I think it's the Dragon Spine Mountains at the end of Caledor. And he actually knows their language for the most part too. So dragons really dig on Imrik. I mean, like, he's kind of got it down pat. Like, if Imrik was like on a Tinder for dragons, he'd just be a nonstop right. He's even a super like, you know. But he's got some magic items here, and again, you're going to start to recognize some of these. So the first one is Star Lance. The tip of this deadly weapon is forged from the heart of a fallen star. With a blade of such keenness, no armor can protect Imrik's foes. And the way this actual item left Imrik in 7th and 8th edition, because he's not in the book, and it just became a magic item your lord could take. And what this does is, on the charge in the tabletop, it gives him strength, and people can't roll armor saves against it. Now, here's the interesting thing: the Star Lance is in Total War Warhammer 2, and what it does in Total War Warhammer 2 is it grants 10 AP, it gives 12 charge bonus, 4% weapon damage, and it makes all your attacks magic. So it's pretty good weapon. I mean, pretty awesome weapon to have on your lord. I mean, I dig it. And especially if you're creating a dragon-themed lord, which we're going to get more into. Then you've got the Armor of Caledor here. For well over 4,000 years, the masters of the House of Caledor have worn this armor in battle. Gives Imrik a 2+ armor save, which again, you guys wouldn't even understand how that would equate into this game. It would just mean heavily armored. And it allows him to basically be immune to breath attacks and to have like a resistance to fire. Now, again, the Armor of Caledor is already in Total War Warhammer 2. And what it does in Total Warhammer, armor plus 12, ward save 5%, fire resistance 20%, keeping in with the same fire resistance bonus that we get from tabletop, and physical resistance plus 5%. So you do get a lot of the same bonuses translated into the way it would look like in Total War Warhammer 2. I know they kind of skipped out on being having any kind of immunity to Dragon Breath, but if you're using Dragon Breath on a single unit, it's not going to be as effective as a single lord, as effective as it would be on a single unit, a block of men. But, you know, that's neither here nor there. You can't have one piece of armor be that OP. But next item here is the Dragon Horn. This war horn was made from the horn of an ancient dragon, gifted to Imrik's distant ancestors in elder days. The dying fire drake summoned all his remaining power to enchant his remaining unbroken horn as he lay bleeding in the aftermath of the Battle of the Glade of Tears. And effectively what this does in the tabletop, it allows you to re-roll armor saves, or I'm sorry, not that at all, leadership tests. But what this would, it is already in Total War Warhammer, and it just, you pop it and it boosts your leadership of whoever's in the aura. So we again already see this in Total War Warhammer 2. And it has a pretty direct translation. I mean, we don't have any leadership roles, so you're not going to get anything like that. But he does have these two other kind of special rules / items / beasts. For millennia, Imrik, or this thing is called Dragonkin. For millennia, Imrik has learnt the lore and languages of dragons. He has walked the deep caves where the great beasts sleep and dream, and even the most proud and mighty fire drakes obey his every word. And in the tabletop, this means that no dragon will fight him personally. And in tabletop, you fight the dragon and the rider at the same time. They both have a stat profile and they both attack separately. So obviously we don't really see that in Total War. The profiles are kind of combined and you don't kill one over the other. Because in tabletop you can actually kill just the rider and not the mount. And that kind of plays into this next rule here. Menaithnir. Imrik rides the majestic dragon Menaithnir. They have a mutual bond between them, the last of the true dragon princes and one of the last of the dragons. And the way this works in tabletop is if you kill Imrik, Menaithnir gains frenzy and goes berserk. Now, we can't have that in Total War Warhammer 2 because you can't kill one or the other. They might maybe make it so that below a certain percentage, there's a higher chance he might go, he might rampage. But I don't really see that happening. It doesn't really fit into the high elf kind of norm, because nothing in the Hyals are all about discipline and martial prowess and being, everything's very orderly and very regimented and very, very uniform. But do I think that Imrik will be a legendary lord? I unfortunately don't think so. I think that the High Elves need a lord like Imrik, but you can build Imrik out in the campaign. There was one gentleman on the subreddit who actually brought to my attention that a lot of these are in the game. I'd only seen the Dragonhorn and the Starlance, but the Armor of Calidor, the Starlance, the Dragonhorn, they're all in the campaign. So if you want, you can make a lord that is basically Imrik, and then rename him Imrik if you even want to. So maybe that's their kind of nod, that you can kind of build Imrik in the campaign, and they're not going to add him as a legendary lord. Or maybe even that's their teaser. Hey, we've done this. Now you can build out. Now here's our kind of teaser that he's coming. He's coming one way or another. So there is that option. But the difference here too is that in 6th edition, Imrik's dragon is not that great. It wasn't until 7th and 8th edition so we got the Sun, Moon, and Star Dragons. And the Menaithnir has the same profile basically as a Star Dragon with, as a Sun Dragon with Moon Dragon weapon skill and wounds. So he's like a slightly better dragon, but not as good as, say, just a straight up Star Dragon. So it's interesting to see what they'll do with Imrik, and if they'll even do anything with Imrik. Like I said, he's kind of a bit of a landmine. Like, do you go in that direction knowing that you can pretty much already built him? The only thing missing is a custom skin for him, basically. Or do you present something like Eltharion, who would bring Griffins to the High Elves, which are missing. Griffins are a really big part of the High Elf army list. And a lore that is very unique. You know, he's got a really cool backstory. He hunts greenskin. He spends a lot of time over in the Southlands. That would make a lot of sense as to having a new starting option for the High Elves to be starting in the Southlands to already get a foothold into the Eastern continents right off the bat. You know, right now, even in Mortal Empires, you've got Tyrion starting in Ulthuan. You've got Teclis in those islands right above at the top of Lustria. So he can edge his way over into the Southlands pretty quickly, but I'd rather have Eltharion just starting right in the thick of it against greenskins right off the bat, because with Tyrion and Teclis, you don't start around greenskins. You have to move your way into them, yeah, and you can deal with them as a roving kind of rogue army, but you're not going to be up against the greenskin hordes of the greenskins, you know, the faction greenskins. But let me know what you guys think. I'd love to hear what your opinions are. A lot of people are really hellbent that it's going to be a Lithanar. I'd really like to see it be Eltharion, because I think a Lithanar would come as a DLC alongside maybe like another Dark Elf Lord, to both add a unit and a lore at the same time. I'm not so sure that they would add a FLC, a free LC Lord with the unit that corresponds with it, you know, i.e. Shadow Warriors and Lithanar. But let me know what you guys think. Love to get your opinions as always, guys. We'll be doing another 2 streams here next week. We'll do our Saturday and Sunday stream as always, and we got a lot of goodies planned for you throughout the week. We got the big Tomb King video landing here pretty soon, and some more quick battles. We're going to be kind of amping up those quick battles, get a lot more out to you guys. But thanks for watching. Have a good one, and take care. We are nearing the time, or at least the estimated timeline, for the next FLC Lord here, hopefully in March, for the High Elves. So we've seen basically this FLC list. We've seen some Skaven on it, we've seen the Lizardmen on it, we've seen the High Elves on it, but we had seen in that one leaked picture that we went over not too long ago about the possibility of Shadow Warriors coming in the Rise of the Tomb Kings DLC. It looks like everything else was kind of confirmed from that, in Tretch Craventail and the Tomb Kings themselves, but we did not get Shadow Warriors. So what are we going to see with that High Elf FLC? Are we going to see an FLC, of course, free downloadable content, DLC, downloadable, whatever, free LC? What are we going to see? Are we going to see the Sisters of Avalorn finally coming? Are we going to see the Shadow Warriors? Are we going to see Alarielle in a prelude to the Shadow Warriors, or a Lithanar in Alarielle in a prelude to the Sisters of Avalorn? Or are we going to see a Lithanar in a prelude to the Shadow Warriors? So I'm very
I'm very curious. I don't know, what are we going to see? But one option that no one's really talked about, and we didn't even really talk about when we talked about the list of all of the high elves and all of their army lists, we really didn't touch on this. So what I want to talk about today are the Dragon Mages of Calidor. And we're going to go into the lore blurb about them as we always do, and I'm going to talk to you guys about what their abilities are from the tabletop, and as well as why I think, or at least how I think, they will be implemented in a Total War Warhammer 2 scenario. So let's read this lore blurb here real quick for the Dragon Mages of Calidor. Into every generation of the Calidorian nobility, a handful of dragon mages are born, elves who have a sensitivity not only to magic, but also to the minds of slumbering dragons. Many nascent dragon mages only recognize their destiny when their sleep becomes haunted by dreams of fire and blood, in which they ride dragons the color of the setting sun. Such dreams mark the dying days of a mage's tutelage, for they herald an impetuousness that is ill-suited to the study of anything other than fire magic. When able, the dragon mage journeys to the sulfur-clogged caverns below the mountains of Calidor, there to awaken a slumbering sun dragon to serve as his steed. This is a process that normally takes months or even years, yet a dragon mage can fully awaken a dragon with but a whisper of its name. Thus begins a bond that lasts until either mount or rider is slain in Ulthuan's defense. So, I mean, already right there you have a pretty epic sounding unit. You have and something that is also not done in the game already. We do not have a lord that is a caster for high elves. We don't have a lord that is a caster for dark elves, which is very uncharacteristic because in the tabletop, you played high elves and you played dark elves most of the time with a casting lord. For instance, I played in my actual tabletop army of the high elves, I had a prince, which is just the hero version of their melee heroes, and then I had an archmage or archmage. I did not actually have a I'm sorry, I had a noble. The prince is the lord version, but I did not have an actual fighting lord. I had just a casting lord, because the casting ability of the high elves is very, very profound in tabletop, and it is not reflected that way in Total War Warhammer 2. It is not reflected that way in Total War Warhammer 2 for the Slann either, with the Lizardmen. That's very lacking. It's the same thing with the Dark Elves. The Dark Elves have access to all the lores. The High Elves have access to all the lores. Lizardmen have access, well, the Slann have access to all the lores. Instead, we kind of get these watered-down casters that only have access to, I believe the High Elves have light, life, and high magic. As I think about that, yeah, they don't have access to heavens, which is kind of like a de facto good guy lore. I think Dov Plays and I were talking about that. He's like, why the hell isn't heavens there? I'm like, I don't know, man. But they don't have access to metal. They don't have access to shadows or death. And I mean, really, they need death to stay competitive. And the high elves are already under the kind of power curve right now. They need something to kind of push them over that edge. And with the Tomb Kings having come out, the Dragon Mages of Calidor are a really great addition to the high elf roster in a kind of a thematic way that would directly counter a Tomb King army and a lot of other armies. But the Sun Dragon, as we know, is the youngest of the dragons: Sun, Moon, Star. And we also know that the Sun Dragon is, just like the Dragon Mage of Calidor, is very impetuous, as we've discovered here, but also full of fury, always willing to dive into combat. And that's kind of the same moniker that the Dragon Mages of Calidor subscribe to, that they have this kind of mage cast that is, even against other mages, way more willing to jump into the thick of things. And that's kind of a cool thing that you've got with the Dragon Mages of Calidor here. But they only have access to the lore of fire. And we've seen how Total War has implemented multiple lores in factions. Like you take a look at Empire, you take a look at Chaos, and even some of the other ones for High Elves and Dark Elves, how the Empire has access to each and every one of their lores, minus, of course, the ones that are missing, Death. But I could see that being, Dragon Mage of Calidor being a great way to add in into fire magic into an army that is going to need something to help them really oppose the Tomb Kings. As we all know, Tomb Kings do take quite a bit of damage from fire magic. That's not to say that the High Elves only can get fire magic the Lore Fire through the Dragon Mages of Kalador. Their normal mages have access to it too as in tabletop, but let's kind of go through some of their abilities here. They have the typical abilities that any High Elf has from the tabletop: Always Strike First, Martial Prowess, Valor of Ages, that kind of jazz. But they do have some other cool abilities here, one being called Reckless, and this gives a bonus to cast spells from the Lore of Fire. But they don't get any kind of bonuses for dispels. So that's not really important. You don't dispel in this game. But what would be cool though is if Reckless was almost kind of like an Arcane Conduit without being an Arcane Conduit. Rather than giving it a passive regeneration, maybe it's just a one-time shot to your Winds of Magic, or maybe it reduces the cost of your next. Because that's something I would really like to see in the game, is ability that you can trigger that would reduce the cost of this, or make X, Y, and Z cost less. Like you trigger Reckless. Okay, now my next Lore of Fire ability is cast at a little bit lower Winds of Magic cost, something along those lines. Another special rule they've got is Warrior Mage. And basically this just means that the Dragon Mage starts off with the Flaming Sword of Ruin. In the tabletop, you have to roll to see which actual spells you have. You don't just say, okay, I've got all these spells, I'm going to not choose these ones like you do in Total War Warhammer. You actually have to roll dice dictated on, or depending upon your actual wizard level, and then that's how many spells you have and which spells you do have. So rather than rolling for it, you automatically get the Flaming Sword of Ruin. So maybe Warrior Mage has something to do with, even not necessarily a special rule for the Dragon Mages of Kalador, but it's something that it actually just kind of, okay, in their stat profile, they are a bit more of a hybrid lord, something that I think that the High Elves need. Like, I mean, you take a look at Total War Warhammer 2, you've got Malekith as this beastly hybrid lord. You even look at Arcane the Black, who is a hybrid lord as well. Even though he kind of looks like he would be purely a caster lord, he's not. He just gets up in there and melts face with his damn Arcane Tombblade action. But I think that the High Elves need that. Teclis has his ability to get up there and fight, but it's not a true hybrid role. And even in tabletop, he is not considered a hybrid caster by any stretch of the imagination. So the Dragon Mage of Kalador, I think, is a really great way to get one of the biggest strengths of having the High Elves in the competitive meta, which is they're dragons, and a great way to take advantage of the supposed, from a lore perspective, magic ability of the High Elves. I really want to see the High Elves kind of dominate the magic phase like they did so much in the tabletop. Like right now, I feel like, oh, you're taking High Elves and you're using magic, great. You're no better or worse than any other caster. You just have access to high magic. And with Fiery Convocation taking, what is it? I think it's 8 to 9 minutes to cast a damn spell. You really, it's a level playing field across the game, if not even under, again, the power curve. So here is my speculative opinion on what I think another really good FLC lord would be. Rather than us taking a look at a legendary lord, maybe just something that isn't necessarily a legendary lord, that is just a nice new generic lord for the faction, but something that I think that the faction kind of needs. Obviously, the faction really needs an anti-large AP ranged unit that is not a bolt thrower, but we probably won't get those until we see Sisters of Avalorn come into the game, who will probably also have some sort of magic or fire attack here. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this little lore blurb here on the Dragon Mages of Kalador. We didn't touch on them previously, and I wanted to give them the proper justice that they do deserve. They've kind of shrunk over the years in the actual tabletop books themselves. So hopefully this gives you guys an opinion, or at least an idea of how the Dragon Mages of Kalador fit into not just Total War Warhammer, but also the lore of the game. I mean, we've talked about how Kalador is this land of very noble but precocious dragon princes. And yes, I suppose it'll fight for you, but at the same time, they are very vehement in their defense of Ulthuan. The dragon mages of Kalador kind of mirror that exact same sentiment, although with the impetuousness and the tenacity of the overall role that the dragon mage fulfills. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this video here today. We're going to have a lot more lore coming your way here. Again, we've got our 40k lore. We've got our big Total War Warhammer 3 suspected Darklands lore. I guess that's what I'm going to call it. Plenty more coming on the horizon here, guys. But don't forget to like or comment. Let me know if there's anything you want to know about the Dragon Mages of Kalador, or maybe even your opinion of what's coming out in the next FLCs for some of the other races. But thanks for watching, guys. Have a good one and take care. Hey, everybody. So with the launch of Total War Warhammer 2, there's been a lot of exciting information about some of the campaign mechanics,
some of the Easter eggs, everything really. I mean, everyone's found so many awesome things about Total War Warhammer 2 that they've just been flooding the Reddit, and it's been pretty awesome. Like, you know, I'm stuck at work and I get to kind of pour through what everyone's found throughout the day, then go back at it when as soon as I get a chance to go home. But Weapon Master 470 posted on the subreddit a great list of all the landmark locations for the High Elves in Ulthuan. And as you guys know, the High Elves are kind of my jam. So I wanted to go through some of those. And he also did the same for Nagaroth. So big shout out to him right there. I'll be, you know, tossing him a reference in the actual post itself. And a link to his Imager. So like, as a kind of like a too long didn't read type thing, he has everything in one nice Imager album, so you can take a look at him real quick. But in today's episode, like I was saying, I want to cover those unique locations, go over their campaign mechanics, as well as talk about what they are from a lore mechanic. You know, so let's dive right in here, because really there's quite a few. There's 18 of these bad boys, so this video shouldn't be hopefully too long, but it's going to be kind of long. But let's just kind of jump on to it. Starting with the Court of the Everqueen. So this is located in Avalorn, in the capital of Gain Vale. So interesting how the flavor text sort of makes this sound like a permanent encampment. The Court of Avalorn is a great carnival, pitching silken pavilions in which elves make sport and recite epic poetry. In truth, the court sort of roves around Avalorn, almost like a carnival that would come in and out of town. In the Tyrion Techless books, there are a series of tournaments that are actually held in these carnivals, and this is where Tyrion first meets Elariel, falling for her essentially. And coincidentally, this is also when the Dark Elves decide to attack, killing a large amount of the nobles, because it's in the process. And it's kind of, this is where they're having these jousting tournaments and everything, all these feats of strength, these feats of scholarly prowess. But Tyrion and Elariel make their kind of grand escape and flee through the forest. And it's really kind of this cool portion of the book that has just these two as refugees from the Dark Elves. But the point of this court, though, is to spread merriment, entertain people from location to location, all sorts of fun-loving going on, more or less. So with that being said, the campaign mechanics sort of play hand in hand into that and are, in my opinion, quite strong. So Total War Warhammer 2 is really all about public order. It's difficult to maintain it with the ability to capture just about any city, and a lot of sources are stacked really against you. So the building gives you a whopping 10 public order, which is pretty great. You know, anytime you can double dip into public order for your buildings, huge bonus to you. But on top of that, you get 5 growth, faction wide, as well as an increase to your Lord recruitment rank, which will be substantial by the time you probably prop this bad boy up. And it does aid in getting rid of corruption. But that'd be more of an end game mechanic than an early boon, but a boon nonetheless. So you'll get 2 Great Eagles and a Sun Dragon in your garrison as well. Coupled with the garrison of a rank 5 city, that'll make the city even harder to crack open. That's the kind of nice thing about a lot of these unique buildings we're going to see. They give you thematic garrison units, which is again really strong in case anything were to happen while you're abroad. You know, you get this invading army, whatever it is, you actually at least have a substantial garrison to fight that off. Let's jump on over into Caledor with the Hall of Dragons, and this is located in Val's Anvil within Caledor. So this is kind of a Creative Assembly created location in Val's Anvil for Caledor. And when I say Creative Assembly created location, man, that was a tongue twister. I'm saying that they kind of buffed up the lore behind this. This does exist on the map, which is cool. So they definitely took those kind of pointers, but the lore from behind it is entirely credited by them. But we've really already talked about how every portion of Ulthuan is dedicated to one aspect of their warrior caste or society in general. The Dragon Princes hail from Caledor itself, and in the current era, they mount these barbed elven steeds in the fashion of dragons, as we've seen in the game itself. But in the time of Anarion, all Dragon Princes were mounted atop these majestic ancient beasts of old, and Caledor is still one of the only places in the world you can find a multitude of these dragons. Waking the dragons themselves requires this specific rituals, these dances and songs. It's really kind of foppish, but some of the most skilled elves can pull it off. I mean, that's how you have Imrik Prince Imrik from Caledor has one of the more older and stronger dragons, one of the older and stronger dragons, because he's very skilled at raising these dragons. And the Hall of Dragons little text here is, gaze upon the majestic beasts of old and realize your place within the world. And they are very ancient beasts, and as a part of that, they look at giving their services to the high elves as more of like a, I suppose I shall do so. They're not entitled. I'm sorry, they're not beholden to the high elves. So if you're going a pretty dragon heavy campaign, this building is gonna be key. You're gonna get minus 25% upkeep for dragons across all armies, minus 25% recruitment, and they're gonna come out at rank 4. Or with 1 silver chevron, if you want to think of it that way. So if you recruit 4 dragons, 1 is free cost-wise. Also, you're getting a moon and a star dragon on top of your rank 5 city too. Good luck cracking that puppy open. And the nice thing too is that this is a ritual city. This is very important for the ritual process. So it's nice that you're going to have a substantial garrison by the time you have intervention armies kicking into it. Lastly here, though, you get 20 more exotic cages as a tradable resource, which is nice because this settlement to the north within the province of Calidor's Rest, or I'm sorry, I guess the settlement would be Calidor's Rest. The province itself would be Calidor, but Calidor's Rest has exotic creatures as the resource. And once you get it to rank 3, the actual building for those exotic creatures, it gives a bonus to all eagles, phoenix, and dragons. So this is obviously going to get pretty disgusting here. So you're going to have minus 30% upkeep and recruitment cost. So stack that up to 55% now. And an additional 2 ranks. So any dragon you pump out of the Calidor province is going to have 3 silver chevrons. Faru Mountain Dew. But that kind of fixes off Calidor here, and we'll jump into another one over here in Trace with the White Lion Hunting Grounds. And these are located in Tor. I never really get this one right. Tor Acre, A-C-H-A-R-E in Traces. And again, this is another made-up location by CA, but it's still a very lore-relevant one, as the White Lions of Trace have to hunt and either kill or tame a white lion in order to join the elite warriors of their hinterland. And Tor Eker is the capital of Trace in the lore, and it's founded around the time of Anarion himself. And it's always kind of stood as one of the main hard points, the main bastions against the Dark Elves, defending the northern shores of Ulthuan for centuries. And these grounds are probably crawling with the majestic Santa lions with their braided and bladed manes, but I just want there to be chariots, you know, like now, right now. White Lion chariots were so cool. The models were beautiful. They were really strong in the tabletop, I thought. So I'd love to see them in this game fast, but not a lore on this one. So let's kind of get into the campaign mechanics on it. I'll read the little blurb. White lions are proud predators that roam the northern forests, who are in turn hunted by Trace's warriors. So we're looking at a bit of an underwhelming one by comparison to the last 2 we've just talked about. You only get +2 ranks to White Lions, minus 5% upkeep for White Lions, as well as 2 in the garrison and 20 exotic animal cages. It is a rank 4 building, or unique building, so the slightly reduced majesticness of the building makes a bit more sense, but the woodcutting, hides, and now exotic animals in Trace, it offers quite a bit as far as trade for the province. So Trace can hopefully kind of cement your economy as far as giving you some additional trade value. Well, switching gears a little bit more on this, actually, we'll move over to the ancient subterranean palace located in Tor Corali within Kothic. We've talked about how Kothic has a lot of subterranean mansions, which is a direct contrast to a lot of the other nations having these sprawling mansions across the plains of Eataine or floating in the skies above Safri, all means of craziness. But Kothic has dealt with its fair share of flooding since the Sundering, so a lot of the majesty of Kothic is beneath the ground. Tor Corali being one of the 2 larger cities in Kothic. And this is a nice alternative building for Kothic to get their nobles, because it comes with the price of happening further in the tech tree than the standard high elf fairgrounds or whatever it is that generates the nobles. But as a result, though, you get some of the same benefits. 5% increase from entertainment, unlocks nobles and public order +5. But you also get your hero capacity increased. Faction-wide increases to noble ranks and a 25% income from ports in that province. And lastly, you get a noble in your garrison, which is very nice for an outward-facing outer realm like Kothic, because you're going to be dealing with a lot of raids from Norse or the Dark Elves. So it's a great way to at least buff up some of the garrison of that main actual capital of that province.
After dealing with Kothic, though, let's move over to the Sacred Flame of Assyrian. This is located at the Shrine of Assyrian in Eataine. And we've talked about how there are shrines dotting almost every portion of Ulthuan, and they're dedicated to all their many gods, namely the gods of the Gadai. And the Shrine of the Assyrian is unique in that this is where every Phoenix King is ordained via a literal trial by fire with the Flames of Assyrian. After walking through the fire, if the king comes out unscathed, then he is the rightful king of Ulthuan, unless he's Malekith. Then he just becomes Darth Vader, Warhammer Edition. The Shrine of Assyrian, though, is also where all the Phoenix Guards are housed. So these are those elite warriors who are protected by an otherworldly shield, conferring them their ward save in the tabletop. But they're clad from head to toe in golden armor, as we've seen in the game, and they already know the exact moment they will die, but are sworn also to take on a vow of silence. And they're some of my favorite units in the High Elf roster, and as you can see, they're quite beastly from what you've played within the game so far. I really love them. I use them almost in every one of my builds because they're just such elite frontline troops. They can just take on everything. But this one has some interesting boons, right? So it's got a minus 45% construction cost for warship buildings in the province, and a minus 5% faction-wide. So that's pretty nice. Then you also get a minus 5% upkeep for Phoenix Guard, as well as a +2 rank for their recruits. I'm a huge fan of that bonus, as we've just talked about how much I enjoy Phoenix Guard. But you also are going to get 5 Public Order and a gnarly garrison of 3 Phoenix Guard and a Flamespire Phoenix. And the nice thing here is that this is a tier 1 building. I mean, it can be built right off the bat, which is, again, huge. And here's a special little mechanic, though. You get +1 of your faction's favored corruption, so chaos and what have you. So, I mean, that's pretty nifty. It's not huge, not game-breaking, but again, in the later games when you have to worry about that, or later portions of the game when you have to worry about that, it is great that you have something literally in the heart of your empire, if you're High Elves, pumping out untainted for you. That's going to always be a benefit. So we'll move on, though, to the Royal Illyrian Stables, located in Tor Illyr in, well, Illyrian. And Illyrian is the land of horses, right? Like the Rohan of the Warhammer world. So only a lot less North themed and a lot more, again, foppish. But Dark Elves steal into these lands to capture Black Elf steeds, to turn them into mounts for the Dark Riders called Dark Horses. And we've talked about that a little bit in our flyover campaign video. But the Illyrians see, or Illyrians, see a great deal of conflict, as it is one of the first inner kingdoms to face any invading army. But they are brash and wild, even by elf standards, with these grand competitions of the horse. You know, they prize their steeds really above all else. And for any of you cav-happy generals, such as myself, this is really a good building to be going for, because it's a nice little upgrade to the faction. So it's a minus 5% upkeep to Reavers and Silverhelms, and a +2 rank to both units as well. Then you get 2 of each Reaver in the garrison, and 500 additional income. So I'll be honest, this is kind of an underwhelming building by comparison, since it is a tier 5 building, and maybe some public order for the province itself, since Illyrians venerate horses so much. But I mean, I can see why there's no reduction to recruitment costs on units that are already so cheap as is, and especially if you're already taking Tyrion, then you already have a minus to the recruitment cost of a lot of these units, or a minus to the upkeep of a lot of these units. So I kind of understand the line they're drawing here, but at the same time, maybe not a rank, maybe not a tier 5 building. This could have been probably a tier 4 because of the level of boons, benefits. I mean, we take a look at some of the other tier 5s we looked at and it's like, whoa, holy shit. This one, pretty good, but still. So we're gonna actually go into a series of buildings in the same region, province, whatever. It's gonna be a little irritating here, guys, but bear with me, because there's a lot in what we're about to just talk about. So we'll start with the Glittering Tower White House, and this is located in the Glittering Tower in the Straits of Lothern. And we've talked about this briefly when we did the campaign flyover as well, but the Glittering Tower is really the vanguard defense for the 3 gates of the port of Lothern, Ruby, Emerald, and Sapphire. And the Glittering Tower acts as a beacon for incoming ships and warning for raiding vessels, as any ship coming into Ulthuan is sandwiched between the Lothern Sea Guard defenses ranging the entirety of the Lothern Strait and the Glittering Tower's forewarning system. And this one you'll get pretty early in the Tyrion campaign, which is nice, as it is a tier 3 unique building, meaning it should probably be the last on the Glittering Tower, but still you can jump onto it pretty quickly. It has some good early benefits as well, 5% trade tariff or trade agreement
agreements across the faction, and 5% income from ports. Couple that with Gothic slightly later in the campaign, and that's 30% trade from ports in the Gothic region only, because that 25% to ports is exclusive to Gothic. But the garrison is nice too for an early garrison, right? 1 bolt thrower and 3 Lothern Sea Guard, that's pretty great. And I wish it had some public order on it as well. You know, the Glittering Tower instilling a sense of justice in the society. But I think I just have to have a boner for public order in this iteration of the game. But I mean, you can also tell that this thing is going to be, it's going to see a lot of combat, especially in the early game. So it's nice that they have this pretty early accessible, unique building to get you up on and running on a pretty sizable garrison. And another building here, Straits of Lothern, or the Harbor of Lothern, or the Gates of Lothern, whichever you want to call it. This is located in the, okay guys, it's in the Straits of Lothern again. So we don't need to go over much of the lore here, as we just touched on it with the Glittering Tower, but this is the gateway into the Inner Kingdom and safeguards the nation, as well as the capital from naval blockades and invasions. And a lot of the deeper lore is covered in our campaign flyover video that I've mentioned a couple times here, so I will link that at the end. But so we have 3 levels to deal with. A tier 1, 3, and 5 building. And we'll break each one down with a level associated with it. So the Straits of Lothern is level 1. That's a tier 1 building. That gives you 300 income, 10 growth, and makes sense. It's a port. The Harbor, which is the level 2, that is the tier 3 building. That is 600 income, 20 growth, 5% tradable resources, and +1 to your Lothern Sea Guard. That's pretty great. Now, the third one, the tier 5 building, the Gates of Lothern, that's got 1,000 income, 30 growth, 10% tradable resources, and +4 to the rank of your Lothern Sea Guard units. So you're getting Silver Chevron Lothern Sea Guards out the gate, no pun intended, recruiting from the entire province of Lothern, which is pretty nice, as you all know how much I love the Lothern Sea Guard. And they're already pretty damn strong in campaign as it is, and you spend a lot of your time in that portion of Lothern to begin with. So you do reap some early benefits of this in the tier 1 and 3 buildings. Not a whole ton of late game tier 5 benefits, but you still do get those, as I think that the later game is spent more with Lothern Sea Guard than with archers. So the next building, though, I bet you can't guess where this is, because we still haven't left Lothern yet. So this is the last one, I swear. It's the Throne of the Phoenix King. And the court of the Phoenix King was moved, from a lore perspective, from Nagarath to Lothern after Denarian's reign. And there it has remained really ever since. And as elves are very staunch and upright in their stuffy traditions, that's why it's just not going to budge. But the Phoenix King holds court with all the princes and nobles of Ulthuan, and some staying for prolonged periods, acting as direct advisors to the liege of the land. Really, one thing's for sure, just as the flavor text says, this is where the intrigue and influence of the High Elf Kingdoms is played out. Let me read that text here for you. At the court of the Phoenix King, many come to petition the Finubar, and play their intrigues. I should probably say the Phoenix King. Not sure. But it's always weird how you like those like, oh, did you save a newspaper with like a typo on it? It could be worth millions. Weird. Neither here nor there. But one thing I think is kind of upsetting about this, but at the same time is probably for balance, is the tier of this building. Again, tier 5. It grants 1 influence per turn. And by the time really you get the funds and Empire to run this building, I don't think an influence on that small of a scale is going to be hugely beneficial. I mean, either way, I'd rather have it than not have it, but still, 1 influence at the court of the Phoenix King seems pretty insubstantial. Again, though, I understand maybe if it is from a balance perspective, whatever, but just 1, But from there, you do get a nice +10 public order. You know how I feel about public order. But here's the best part about the building, though. You get +2 rank for both heroes and lords, with a +1 capacity for heroes as well. Couple that with the influence, although minor, and hopefully you'll have a beefy Alias Star in no time. What seems to be like the clone of Corhill, or what they're going to be using as Corhill if they don't add him in. Finally, though, moving away from Lothern, we're going to jump into the Black Citadel of Anlek. And this is located in Tor Anlek within Nagarath. And this is probably one of my favorite unique buildings, as there's so much history around Tor Anlek as a whole. Anarion hailed from Nagarath, as we know here, but this is where he made his seat of power. The court of Anarion was held in the fortress of Tor Anlek at the time. But after he died and Malekith rose to power, he took over his father's
ancestral fortress, as you would assume. But during the Sundering, it was where Malekith led the majority of the war from. And in the final moments of the Sundering, Torrenlech was sent beneath the waves as a result of the massive magic backlash from the Great Vortex. That same backlash that they talk about at the very beginning of the elf campaigns, and how they sent those big, like, it looks like these magic missiles into the Great Vortex, and how Kalador Dragon Tamer came forth to defend the land. But with it, he caused this big backlash of magical energy, which sent a lot of Wolfwind under the waves, and Nagarath, to protect themselves, rose themselves up from the ground. All like Hagraith and all these things that have become the cities of Nagaroth are these cities that float up from Nagarath and float away. But it's interesting to see it in the game, to be totally honest with you, and I really like that they're using it. It's typically portrayed as ruins, so it's cool to see it as a Dark Elf looking citadel, and showing where the Dark Elves get their kind of architecture from, right? So this is kind of one of the primogenitors of all the Dark Elf buildings. And when I say it's typically seen as ruins, it's because they're constantly submerging this thing and bringing it back, submerging this thing and bringing it back in the lore. But you get some pretty great benefits for using it too, you know, plus 10 to public order and plus 25 income from all buildings in the region. And the special benefits of the building, though, make it pretty impregnable. 50% ammo during siege fights and 2 Dragon Princes, along with 3 Gate Guard, and finally, minus 10 leadership for sieging opponents. Pretty huge for an economic powerhouse in the region as well. So I'm really stoked on that, because we've seen how pretty devastating High Elf range is. I mean, they have range comparable to Deepwood Scouts, which is pretty damn awesome. But on the top of it, they just kind of, if you get them really up there as far as the reload goes with your Lord in his red line, you basically have like a rapid fire arrow launching machine. So it's pretty damn cool. I wish that we had Shadow Warriors, but I'll settle for the Black Citadel of Anlek until we get Shadow Warriors. But so the next building here is the Shrine of Cain, and this is located in the Blighted Isle within Nagarath. And the Blighted Isle is extremely important to the early history of the Elves, and this is where the dreaded Widowmaker, the Sword of Cain, resides, and the final resting place of both Anarion and his mighty dragon in Draupnir. And this is fabled to be one of the sons of Draupnir, the great father of dragons. And so the sword bestowed a bit of Cain's godly power on the wielder, but it also kind of gave a little bit of Cain's bloodlust, I guess you could say, and malice. And eventually it corrupts Anarion, and as he battles for his people, for the good of his people, he kind of becomes this bitter, cold individual. And the Blighted Isle swaps hands numerous times in the elf history between Dark and High, but this is where we have our Shrine of Cain, which is worshipped by actually both elves, but shunned a little bit more from the High Elves more than anything. But keep in mind, this is going to be the same province as Torrenlech, but a lot of the benefits don't stack. Plus 15 Untainted, plus 1 EXP for all units in all provinces, and plus 15% income from post-battle loot faction-wide, which is pretty nice for a tier 1 building. And when I say don't stack, I mean that there's nothing that stacks from the benefits of Citadel of Anlek. These two buildings, their benefits will stack in total, but like, for instance, Anlek doesn't have anything about Untainted, is what I mean. So you don't get any kind of additional benefits. But you do get 2 Phoenix Guard and 2 White Lions, and they do get a lot better of a garrison with just a tier 1 building, which is really great, because the garrison building for the High Elves is a tier 2 building. So, you know, you can make this right off the bat, and at least gives you a pretty stalwart front line to hold the line at the Shrine of Cain. Opposite of that, though, we have the White Tower of Hoeth, and this is located at Hoeth within Safri. Sort of another, you know, no-brainer here. But the White Tower of Hoeth was commissioned by Belkor Hadris, the Scholar King, one of the great Phoenix Kings of old. And he was the Phoenix King most dedicated to the arcane arts, and created this grand tower as sort of a tribute to Hoeth, the patron god of scholars, wizards, philosophers, and the such. And we've talked about him in the Kadai video. And in the lore, the tower is covered by a series of runes, glyphs, and enchantments that really protect it from the outside world. And we've also talked about how the inside is almost like kind of like Harry Potter-esque, with magic revealing certain pathways to the seeker, that the pathway, like, oh, these are meant for the path for the seeker's heart, or stuff like that. It's very kind of romantic in its sweeping portrayal of how this tower works. So we get a lot of amazing things from the Library of Hoeth, and it's probably one of the best unique buildings, in my opinion, because
you get both Lore Masters and Mages. And with that, you get +2 capacity for Lore Masters and +3 rank on Lore Masters with a +2 rank for Mages. So your casters are just gonna come out juiced, bro, just fucking jacked. But from there, since the elves are so focused around magic, you get +3 winds of magic, which puts you halfway through like an Earthblood, assuming you get a solid roll. But also you're looking at a nice 6% increase to research rate. And lastly, it is going to unlock the Sword Masters as both a garrison and a recruitable unit. And that's 1 building, 3 units, worth the cost alone. Now, honestly, that's just level 1. So if you progress to level 2, you're going to get double the winds of magic, double the research rate, and an additional 2 slots of Mages and Lore Masters, with a whopping +7 rank for Lore Masters and for Mages. So with Safri being so pissed off at you from the start, this will be one of the first unique buildings you get access to outside of Val's Anvil, more than likely. Or if you confederate with Illyrian or Gothic, you might get access to those too. But I know in my campaign, Illyrian and I are firm friends, but Safri is just burning up the whole entire Eastern Kingdom and wants to just kick me in the teeth. Speaking of being kicked in the teeth, let's talk about horses. So the Hall of Charioteers, the Palace of Tiranoc, those 2 buildings there rank up from one another, is located at Tor Anrock within Tiranoc. And Tiranoc is where, well, the Charioteers of Ulthuan hail from, hence the name Tiranoc Charioteers. You guys get it. With a lot of the lands being swept under the sea during the Sundering, not much is left of the once magnificent realm, to be honest. And CA did a great job of making it look pretty sparse. And I do love how they embellished on things that weren't necessarily important in the lore and sort of made it their own, as this is not really a significant in the lore anywhere. Like no one really talks about the Hall of Charioteers or the Palace of Tiranoc, maybe like a passing sentence or here and there. And I like that CA kind of tried to pull a little bit more out of it and make it more alive. And I really like that. Like I like how we've seen the map of Ulthuan now and how they've put a lot of character into it. So obviously this building is going to be focused heavily on the chariots of the region's namesake. So you'll get a +5 public order. Yes. Then +2 experience for chariots, as well as access to chariots themselves and the garrison of Tiranoc chariots. Not to be confused with Ithelmar chariots, which are the close combat variant. Now the level 2 building gets pretty pumped. So that's dishing out 10 public order, -5% upkeep for chariots, +3 EXP for chariots, and 2 more chariots across all, or +2 XP for chariots across all provinces. But lastly, you're going to get a whopping 50% income from all buildings within Tiranoc, and that is massive. So at least you're getting quite a bit of benefit out of using these buildings. And it's really interesting. There seems to be no real rhyme or reason to tier 4, 5, 3, whatever buildings having super stats. Like we saw everything in or we saw the Shrine of Cain or the Shrine of Assyrian being tier 1 buildings and just being super good. And we see the Hall of Charioteers, the Palace of Tiranoc, having a pretty strong economical bonus here. But I don't know, I'm pretty stoked on that. So that's going to round off our Tiranoc here, and we'll jump into our very last option in the Amphitheater of Ivris. So this is located at Tor Ivris of Northern Ivris. And a little blurb from it. They say of Tor Ivris that they say of Tor Ivris that it is easily as grand as any elven city of old. And we've talked a little bit about Tor Ivris, but in the lore, it is kind of sparse. They are kind of a grimmer folk. Gothic and Ivris make up for some very good sea elves, sort of. Sea elves are typically the name given to elves that live in the old world, but they are hardy sailors. And Gothic and Ivris have a lot of the range units. I'm sorry, the flying units, like the Lothern Skycutter, stuff like that. So there's not a ton here on the Amphitheater of Ivris because it is very kind of obscure. There's not very much I remember in the lore talking about how Ivris was a center of entertainment and great revelry was there to be had, and if anything that'd be Avalorn. But it does give you an income of 1,200 and a public order of 10, and you guys know how much I love that. But you do get a nice 2 silver helms with shields, which can be a little underwhelming. But in the campaign, I feel like silver helms are way better than they are in the actual multiplayer. The multiplayer, I feel like they just kind of fall short. But that kind of rounds out all of the buildings here. But what I do want to go into is Ulthuan as a whole. And
Obviously, some of these benefits are going to stack, so let's look at what Ulthuan gets. As a whole, though, again, once you unify the entire nation. And this is going to get pretty gnarly here, so bear with me again. This is, again, things that are going to be faction-wide, all forces. That's what I've seen from the list here. And do let me know if you think that these stack differently. I've always been under the impression that if you make the level 1 and the level 2 of a building, you get both benefits. So if you think otherwise, or you know otherwise, do let me know, do correct me. I'd love to get that set straight. But needless to say, it's going to be pretty worth it to control all of Ulthuan for Tyrion. I mean, hell, even Malekith, since they both start so close. But let's go down the list here. It is quite of a doozy. So you get influence +1 per turn. You get the Lord rank +3 across the whole faction. Hero recruitment rank +3 across the whole faction. And this is obviously, again, aside from what you get within the individual provinces. This is just the things that say faction-wide, all provinces, all nations, all army, stuff like that. Lore Master rank +10, Mage rank +7, Winds of Magic rank +3. I'm sorry, +6 on that. Research rate 12%, Exotic Animals 40, Favored Corruption +1. And then as far as upkeep goes, you get -25% from dragons, -5% from white lions, -5% from Phoenix Guard, 5% from Illyrian Reavers, and 5% from Silver Helms. You do get a -25% recruitment cost reduction from dragons as well. Then as far as unit experience goes, you get +2 to, this is going to be +2 for everything up to what I say. So +2 for White Lions, Phoenix Guard, Illyrian Reavers, and Silver Helms. Then +5 for Lothern Sea Guard. Then another +2 for Chariots. Then lastly, you get a +1 for all units. I believe is the Shrine of the Widowmaker is what gives you that one. But the construction cost has all construction costs is -5% for warship buildings. An additional tradable resources +15% in total. And you're going to get additional 5% income from entertainment, trade, and ports. And then lastly, +15% from post-battle loot. Oh my god. Take a breath now. But that's what it's like to control all of Ulthuan in the campaign and create these buildings we've talked about. So this should give you guys a really good idea of the unique buildings, of the lore of a lot of them, but also as well give you a lot of the idea for what's beneficial to you. What do you want to go for as a specific general in the High Elf nation? Do you want to be a Cav general? Do you want to be a Lothern Sea Guard focused general? You can now kind of shotgun for those buildings now that you know which ones are going to be directly beneficial to you as the kind of High Elf general you want to be. But thanks for watching here today, guys. That kind of wraps up this video. If you did like this one, I will definitely do the one on Nagaroth. Big thanks to Weapon Master again. It was really huge of him to post this up, and I was talking to him back and forth. So he provided me this picture that gives you all of Ulthuan here. So again, thank you, huge Weapon Master 470. You're doing the Lord's work, son. But have a good one, guys. Take care.